Put it way over there. Well, apologize for being a couple of minutes late. We're doing some refresher courses this morning and orientation. So we're just running a couple of minutes behind here. I'll let everybody grab their seats and then we'll go ahead and get started. So with that, will everyone please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So much better doing that. Good. We're not on Zoom. Well, nobody else. Do we have people online? This is like really loud today. Okay, can we do a roll call, please?
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. Director Baines,
Present.
Bradford,
Here.
Branscombe,
Yes.
Houlihan,
Here.
McCully for Burris, Chapman, Desmond,
Here.
Dowden Calvillo,
Present.
Frost, absent, Galdo,
Present.
Gog,
Yes.
Guerrero, Harris, absent, Howdeshell,
Here.
Jennings,
Here.
Joyner,
Here.
Jones,
Here.
Kennedy,
Here.
Knisley,
Here.
Kozlowski, absent, Lauren, absent, Lozano,
Here.
Terry for Sander, absent, Schaefer, absent, Teeter, absent, Thomas. Here. Vane. Here. Viega, excuse me, Vega. Here. Viegas.
No, here.
Thank you. Vice Chair Soon,
Here.
Chair Saragosa,
Here.
and ex officio member Aceves.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. And Lynette, do we have any housekeeping items? This
Just for
morning?
our new board members, for our microphones, you don't need to pick them up. You can leave them on the table. When you press the button, when it's green, that means that you are live and you can speak and it'll go through our recording system. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Lynette. And before we go to public communications, I just wanted to, y'all have a book on your table, The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. This is just as we go into our REI work, as we continue our REI work, I wanted everybody to have the opportunity to read this book and really get a better sense of the disparities, the redlining, other things that have gone through that really kept people of color out of certain neighborhoods. And, it does a really good job, a thorough job of going through those. And we've had speakers come in and talk about this for some of us that have been on the board for a little bit longer. But this really does, I think, do a great service to really understanding that. And so, we'll probably come back in maybe a couple of months and we'll do maybe prior to a meeting or a lunch. And if we want to do some talks through it, we can definitely do that. So hope everybody takes the time to read it. And well, I think we'll touch a little bit on it in our REI presentation today as well. So enjoy the reading.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
are there a series of books that we should be reading? Because I have a recommendation since my professional work is in the water world. We read a great book by Mark Arax about Trent Land chasing dust across the San Joaquin Valley or across the valley that I'd also recommend because it really tells about how California communities came together. So I'm just going to put that on the table. And I think we should solicit other books that help us expand our view and vision of how our communities came together and how we can, look past our own blind spots or our own, institutional bias.
I think that's great. I don't know that we have a list of books, but certainly I am open. I'm sure your colleagues are as well, to have other ones. So we can have more conversation on that. But thank you, Bruce. All right, with that, any other comments? All right. We'll go to public comments. Do we have any public communications this morning?
Thank you, Chair Saragosa. We do have a public communication. Mike Barnsbaum has requested to speak.
Great. Mr. Barnbaum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mic check, mic check. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. I had the pleasure of attending the Transportation Committee 2 weeks ago and would like to thank and recognize Yuba County Supervisor and Board Member Gary Bradford for chairing the committee and having a very healthy and engaging conversation. While I was there on a specific agenda item, there was a discussion that came up just about the region as a whole, the number of projects, the wish list, how lengthy it is, the upcoming cap to cap trip in April, and thinking of going to Washington, D.C. for cap to cap, but with more of a narrowed focus and discussion that could really come out of something there and bring back to Sacramento when the trip is over. And much of what I heard, I completely agree with, and I wanted to share with the entire board. I think a lot of the focus that you should take into consideration and think about before your trip are the many heavy passenger rail infrastructure projects to deliver to the congressional delegation and the administration in Washington, D.C. when you go in a couple months. Valley Rail is top of the list, including Valley Rail North for service beyond the Rio Linda Natoma station into Yuba, Butte, and Shasta counties. Speaking of Shasta County, at least to start up something, the Salmon Runner interstate bus service from Shasta to Sacramento counties along the I-5 corridor, something very supportive from the San Joaquin JPA and Regional Rail Commission. You also have South Bay Connect, a Capital Corridor project, and Link 21, another project under discussion with Capital Corridor and Bay Area Rapid Transit District. All of these, I think, are a great focus to go into your trip to Washington, D.C. And I think that the strongest message Secretary Buttigieg, Vice President Harris, and President Biden would love to hear is that all of these projects in the Northern California mega region, which has been a discussion under the mega region working group, are aimed to make Amtrak great again. And I think that would be something that would be a great message to deliver and hopefully good results to come back home to. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for being here bright and early as well. We both came up on the elevator together. All right, do we have any other public comments on a non-agendized item?
There's no other public communications.
All right, thank you very much. All right, we will move on to the consent calendar. These items are intended to be approved in one motion. However, anyone can remove an item for separate discussion. Does any director wish to remove an item for discussion?
Through the chair,
Yes.
wish to remove item 6 or at least discuss it before approving.
All right. We will pull item 6. Anything else? All right, seeing none. Do we have any public comment on consent calendar?
Chair Saragosa, there's a request from the public to pull item number 4.
Okay, so we will pull item number 4 and 6. Do I have a motion on the rest of the consent calendar?
Bradford will move to approve.
Second by Baines.
All right, we have a first and a second. Roll call, please.
Since we are all in the room, Chair
Oh, that's
Saragosa, we
true.
could do a majority vote if that's
Yes,
Good.
all those
Okay.
in favor?
Aye.
Aye, opposed? All right, thank you. So let's go ahead and go to item 4, please.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Barbara Von Bechtold. I'm on the transportation team here at SACOG. Item number 4 before you today is for the unmet transit needs findings for the coming fiscal year 2024-25. The State Transportation Development Act, or we call it the TDA for short, requires that SACOG make annual unmet transit needs findings for the Sacramento Regional Transit District and TDA eligible jurisdictions in Sacramento, Sutter, Yolo, and Yuba counties. The TDA statutes require that SACOG follow a specific process in making these unmet transit needs findings, and staff have carried out that process that will apply to the coming fiscal year. And you can see that described in attachment A. Transit service requests we received during the unmet transit needs process were evaluated with our social service transportation advisory councils, or STACs, from each county as to whether they meet the adopted unmet transit needs definitions that were approved by the SACOG board. The Social Service Transportation Advisory Councils concur with the unmet transit needs findings before you today. Those are summarized on attachment B and shown in more detail in attachment C, D, and E in your packet. Completion of the unmet transit needs process will allow SACOG to continue apportioning Transportation Development Act local transportation funds for the coming fiscal year to agencies that are eligible to use those funds. So today we'd ask that the board, approve the minutes from the public events and hearings that were held on unmet transit needs, and also adopt the attached resolutions regarding the fiscal year 2024-25 unmet transit needs in each county, the cities they're in, and the Sacramento Regional Transit District.
Great. Thank you, Barbara. Do we have any questions or comments?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Barbara, on the winters, excuse my voice, on the winters resolution, it doesn't use the word reasonable to be met. Is something different about winters than the other ones?
If there aren't any unmet transit needs, period, because the part of the definition is something would have to be an unmet transit need and then also reasonable to meet.
Okay,
There weren't found to be any unmet transit needs in winters, so we did not use that language reasonable to meet in
okay.
there.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Baskin.
I'm curious, this was pulled per a request from the public. I'm curious about their motivation for the request.
We'll have public comment in a second. Any other questions from directors? All right, we'll go ahead and go to public comment on this item. Mr. Barnum.
Yes, and thank you, Barbara, for the presentations, the field events, and the debriefings we've had leading to today's decision. Mr. Chairman, I do want to say this. While this is a very rewarding process to be involved in, it's also a very can be very challenging as well, especially when a lot of the results either are not unmet transit needs in particular, but also eyebrow opening to see that there are unmet transit needs, though yet not reasonable to meet, and many are being referred back to the jurisdictions to consider during their comprehensive operational analysis. So perhaps that would be another process to look at what has been mentioned and go from there. Couple of the challenges, though, that I see forthcoming. During the debriefings, it was mentioned, while there were comments made and very good analysis of the comments, the comment may have been the only comment made. So one of the challenges looking forward when this process starts up again for next fiscal year is, how do we advertise this process, promote this process, and get more people involved in the process, especially the transit riders, whether they're dependent or they are choice riders, and the public as a whole. And then the second one is, if you've been watching any reports lately, the CSU Board of Trustees just made another move forward in the progress to add a CSU satellite campus, auxiliary for Sacramento State, into an area in Placer County, located off of Highway 65. So you're probably aware of the Causeway Connection, a route that connects the UC campus in Davis to the Med Center in Sacramento. So here's the challenge looking ahead. How does Placer County Transit, Sacramento Regional Transit, and the Hornet Shuttle possibly form a partnership and resolve the unmet transit need if there is going to be a campus opening to get people between the two campuses and possibly the Placer campus and Sierra College, as Sierra College is going to be involved in the new Sacramento State Placer campus. So it's something maybe to keep an eye on, as that is still a developing story, but it is evolving, and hopefully Dr. Wood and others at the admin level will be involved in this process too. Thank you, and I encourage you to adopt the item before you.
Thank you, Michael. We'll go ahead and close public comments. Barbara, do you wanted to make any other comments?
Just regarding marketing, since that's something Mr. Barnbaum mentioned.
Yep.
And we do advertise this process on all of the transit vehicles in the 4-county regional transportation planning area, as well as online, through social media. All of our transit operators actually advertise it separately too, through their newsletters and on all of their websites. So we definitely try to put the information out as best we can for this process.
Understood. Thank you, Barbara. All right, any other comments from board? Not, I'll entertain a motion.
Move the item.
Thomas seconds?
All right, thank you. First and a second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll go to item 6. Mr. Miller, I believe, has this report.
Good morning, members of the board. My name is Zach Miller. I'm the program manager for the Blueprint. So SACOG is undertaking an update to the region's long-range transportation and land use plan, the 2025 Blueprint. And SACOG anticipates adopting the plan in late 2025. So ultimately, this plan needs to outline the transportation investment and land use strategies needed to achieve various federal, regional, and local requirements and policy objectives within real-world constraints such as fiscal growth as well as regulatory constraints. So the 2025 Blueprint is subject to the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, and SACOG must complete an environmental impact report, or EIR, for the plan to inform the public and public agency decision makers of significant environmental effects of the proposed plan, identify possible ways to minimize those effects, and describe a set of alternatives for achieving the plan's objectives. So there's 2 distinct recommendations that staff is bringing forth today. First, the SACOG board authorize the staff to release a request for proposal, or an RFP, for professional services to assist SACOG with the development of the environmental impact report for the 2025 Blueprint, and authorize the executive director to select a vendor and negotiate and execute a contract with a not to exceed budget of $800,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Through the chair.
Board, yes.
So regarding item 6, an EIR for Blueprint, I mean, obviously we're authorizing staff to spend $800,000 for an RFP, like it was just mentioned, for something that's not yet been crafted or shared with the folks here on what the growth policy will actually what it'll actually look like. The questions I have is, how's this plan going to balance the needs of new and affordable housing against reducing greenhouse gas when most of the homes that are affordable are built in the outer edge of the region? 2, how is the Blueprint going to help add infrastructure to future employment areas that are closer to where people are living? And 3, what are the strategies that staff is using to ensure people throughout the 6-county region will have equal access to the economic opportunities and not just those closest to the center city of Sacramento? I mean, it seems like this RFP should come to the board for consideration after all those things were brought and ultimately find a contract for, such expenditures. So that's questions I have.
Okay.
Thank you,
So-
Director.
So I will note that regardless of the growth assumptions, any of the strategies, policies included within the plan that we are required to complete, an environmental impact report will be required. So regardless of what those assumptions will be, we will need to conduct this environmental impact report. And then I think that's a good tee up also for a presentation that's going to be a little bit later in this board meeting of kind of where we're at, what's at stake, and where we're going in terms of the blueprint, where we'll answer many of those questions that you had today, Director.
Director Baines and Chair Saragosa, just to echo Zach's comment there, you're going to do a deep dive coming up in this board meeting on the blueprint. This board, and you'll hear this in Zach's forthcoming presentation, you're going to get many bites at this apple, including you'll have to approve a preferred land use scenario, transportation scenario. RFP is so that we have a consultant ready to go to do the EIR process. So I think the really important things, Director Baines, that you raised are all great questions that are what this board is going to be working on for the next 8 months, 9 months. But we want to have somebody ready to go for the EIR because the EIR takes a while. If you've gone through these, and we have to have that environmentally cleared by the time you come to adopt the plan. But you're going and doing an EIR and a plan that you have all seen multiple times and have signed off on.
Question here first and then Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Director Baines. I share your questions and look forward to having that conversation later. Mine is more germane to just the RFP itself and the process of going through RFP without a preferred project, as Mr. Corliss mentioned. How can a firm respond adequately if they don't know what it is they're going to be responding to, or they don't know? I mean, without this board having an opportunity to speak, without the public having an opportunity to speak, I just want to ensure that a preferred project isn't going to be, baked before it comes to this board and has thorough vetting by the public that is transparent, open. And it just seems premature when we're so far away from a preferred project to have an RFP on the street and we don't even know what the secret process is going to look like because of the fact that we have no project.
So I think an important consideration here is, as I mentioned before, that regardless of what that preferred scenario is going to look like, we will need to conduct CEQA on it. And this is just getting out in front of it and having a consultant on board. And so when the RFP is released, it will be more general. It will not have an actual preferred scenario within it that they'll be responding to. And that project description that will inform the actual EIR, that will be developed in concert with the CEQA consultant after the preferred scenario is adopted, hopefully, as you'll learn in the presentation later today, in October, November timeframe. And so this is getting the CEQA consultant on board. Some work can be done prior to that to get things in order so they can hit the ground running once we have that project description set. And then from that point forward, after that October or November adoption of the preferred scenario, then they can really hit the ground running.
How much time do we have? I mean, I thought that the time has been prolonged. We know that. So it seems to me, we're talking about a timeline that isn't a matter of weeks or months. We're talking years at this point. And all due respect, Mr. Corliss, we've all been through the RFP process. We've all been through CEQA. I appreciate you explaining CEQA to me. But having gone through that process, it doesn't have to take years. I still think this is premature when we have not even come close to identifying a preferred project. And I will be asking in item, I believe it's 12, I will be asking about exactly what the process is so that this board has full opportunity to actually be the determining body, and we're not just going to be expected to approve a cake that's been baked for us.
Adoption would be the adoption of the EIR as well as the plan would, we're targeting the end of 2025. So if the preferred scenario is adopted essentially the end of 2024, that gives us 1 year to write the EIR. And so that's, I mean, for a large programmatic EIR that this will be, that's a fairly tight timeframe for getting that EIR done. So we're hoping that we could get the RFP out, on the street earlier, get a consultant on board and do some of that upfront work. But I understand all your points as well,
Yeah, and
Director
I just,
Kennedy.
I see a somewhat of a pattern lately, and some of it is not driven by SACOG. I understand that. A lot of it has been driven recently by state timelines. But it seems like we're seeing more and more items brought to us and told, you got to act quickly on this because we're up to this deadline. I'm seeing a pattern here I'm a little concerned about, and I'll just leave it at that, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to go to Vice Chair Soon, then Director Desmond, and Director Lozano.
Just quickly, I actually had similar thoughts in mind as Director Kennedy. So I would just wanted to add that maybe during, when we get to that point, the notice of preparation process, it might be worthwhile that the board is more informed. I mean, all of us through our respective communities have projects and things going through the CEQA process. And I would venture to guess, we're not always involved in that notice of preparation, but in this case, it might be worthwhile if, that selected consultant can make sure that this board is engaged in that.
We can be sure to do that. And I also note that obviously the notice of preparation would be an official board action as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then the actual
Yep.
public
Prior to
process.
that. Yes.
Yes. Great.
Thank you. Director Desmond?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to echo some of the sentiments of my colleague, Director Kennedy and Director Baines as well. We talked about this at the Policy and Innovation Committee meeting last week. We did not have a quorum to recommend action, but I also have some trepidation about this. I know it has to be done, but I have some trepidation that this could influence ultimately the approach that we take with the blueprint. So just to be clear, this will not be coming back to this board in terms of actually having a chance to look at the RFP or in the selection of the consultant, correct?
Correct.
Because I would like to see that RFP. You said it will be structured very generally, and I'll be scrutinizing it very closely to make sure there aren't any indicators in there or anything that presupposes a direction we might be taking with the blueprint. That's going to be very, very important to me as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Director Lozano?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not going to reiterate, a lot of my questions have already been voiced. I do have some concern that the EIR will influence the plan moving forward, and I think that then takes the ability of the region and our elected board or appointed board to have influence on what that's going to look like. My question is this, and this may be answered in our next item, but what would happen? What would the consultant be able to do between now and December when we come up with our plan or our metrics of how we're going to move forward? What are they going to do in that time that we can't bring somebody on in, I don't know, September or August?
I think one of the key items is the notice of preparation. They would help in crafting the notice of preparation. And then there is a lot of pre-work that could be done in terms of, knowing what is, just getting involved and seeing what a potential, the direction it's headed, potentially answering questions that this board may have, attending a board meeting and potentially answering questions that you all may have for them related to their analysis prior to them beginning actual analysis. And then especially when we get to the final scenario, that October, November timeframe, the drafting, of a project description centered around that final scenario, they would be able to help out with that as well.
And Director Lozano, if I could clarify, generally when you're taking an action, you need an EIR or something.
We can't hear you, Mike.
Say, as far as the timing, under CEQA, the EIR essentially has to be the first step because what it does is inform the action that the board takes. So it's not that when you get to October, November, that then they'll start the EIR. That's when you would need to have an EIR if that's the path that goes. That's when you would need to have that presented to the board along with the action. So just timing wise, and Zach, correct me if I'm wrong here, but timing wise, that's what the issue is that the EIR has to come up when this board takes its final action. You're doing it in light of the environmental impact report.
Okay, thank you.
And if I could also note, it does take some time, probably a number of months to actually put the RFP together, get that RFP out, get solicitations from, consultants, conduct the interviews and get that whole process done and underway. So it wouldn't be likely that we would actually be able, if we took this approach, we wouldn't be able to bring on a consultant for at least, a few months, if not more than that.
Yes, Director Branscombe, then Director Dowden-Covio.
I wonder if it would provide any comfort to have us take a look at that RFP and then vote, as an item on the agenda. Perhaps that would alleviate some of the concern from my colleagues. I know that isn't a general thing that we do, but there has been a lot of discussion around the table from a variety of stakeholders. I agree with them. So it might just behoove us to change it up a little bit and have the RFP come so that we have a chance to take a look at the scope and so forth, and then go from there. Just a suggestion.
Director Dowden-Cavio, I was just going to say, that's perfectly fine. So you can have this come back, you can have it come back and take a look at the RFP. I will say to the concerns around the table, part of why we're trying to bring this to you now is so that you're not rushed when it comes. You have a consultant who is ready to go. Whatever the board signs off on as the preferred scenario, we've got somebody who is who's in place and ready to do that EIR, which does take a long time because it's programmatic, and then the board has to adopt the plan in the fall of 25. If you would like to come back, absolutely, you can have it come back.
And so on that note, I was thinking, and we'll go to Director Brown, I'll go to your just in a second. I was just going to throw out there for sake of conversation is, we did have this come to PI, but because we didn't have a quorum, we weren't able to really dig into it. So one thought I had was, why don't we send this back to PI to really kind of like have a good conversation, and so that we can bring something back that we feel, from that board, is really to do that deeper dive on it, and then bring that back to the full board. And I think you'll have a better vetting of it than we did the last time around. So, Director Branscombe.
Thank you, sir. I agree with the thrust of comments that have been made so far on this. Let me make sure I understand the actual proposal in number 6. Approve the release of an RFP for an EIR for the 2025 blueprint. Authorizing the executive director to select a vendor and execute a contract not to exceed $800,000. On its face, and I have a great deal of respect for James, and he knows that, but on its face, it seems like, should this have been approved on its face, this would have been the final act of the board. Am I missing something? No, that would have been the final act of the board, correct?
That's right. That's correct.
Well, I think when you're doing an $800,000 contract on something that has significant impact on the boundaries within which we operate, I don't think these things should ever be on a consent agenda. And there should be the involvement, as has been discussed here by the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Director.
Sure.
Yes.
I'd like to make a motion that we table this matter, take it back to your pipe, then bring it back to the board.
Second.
Who missed that second down there? Director Havishop. Okay. All right, we have a first and a second. We have further discussion on this item. Anything from staff on this item? All right, seeing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, sounds good. Thank you, Mr. Mueller. Okay. We will go now to our action items. We're going to go to action item number 9, which is our regional funding framework. And Director Thomas has this report for us.
I do. Good morning. It's a pleasure to bring forward kind of where the staff working group and the board working group are with the funding round workshop. And staff has been working closely over the last year with staff from agencies within each of the 6 counties to develop the first piece of framework for the next funding round. And this is significant. The gist of the proposal is to have a 6-county federal program and a 4-county state program. The 6-county federal program will be designed around the major funding sources we receive: CMAQ, Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Funds, and STBG funds, State Transportation Block Grants. Then we envision that the programs aligned with these funding sources, so in terms of CMAQ, that they would follow next gen solutions or clean air programs. Projects within would fit those scopes. In terms of the STBG funds, the State of Good Repair program will be the focus, which are more flexible in their application and projects. The board, especially the board working group, as well as the staff working group, noted that it is significant that each jurisdiction have access to maintenance funds. We know how critical they are in order to maintain the existing network that we all have. And so that's been a key topic of conversation. Let's see. The board working group has received information along the way on what the staff's conversations have been, and the board has provided insights and feedback along the course of this development. The staff working group, which includes members from all partner agencies, has supported the proposal of this framework, which is to have a 6-county federal program and a 4-county state program. So let's get back to this idea of the Fix It First focus on the 4-county state program. So that will be consistent with the state's CAPTI, or the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure Policies. And this program will have 2 categories. The majority will be available for intra-county competition. Local agencies compete for funds. The remainder is proposed to be pooled to allow for regional support for projects or a project that have priority for the region. So once again, the conversation continues to be, how do we balance? How do we balance the needs of our individual jurisdictions along with the needs to provide for regional transportation projects that are important to all of us? The the STIP funds are allocated to SACOG based on county shares, and historically we have pooled these together. The proposal before us would allow for counties to maintain the bulk of their shares, though compete for the shares internally. The actual percentage split will be a policy decision brought to the board later on in the process once the fund estimates have been established. The framework was designed to align the funding round with 2 key SACOG strategic plan goals. One is to foster the next gen of mobility solutions, and number 2 is the building and maintaining a resilient transportation system. So the general notes from the board's working group perspective is the board working group felt it was really important at this point to bring this item to the Transportation Committee and the full board to have a brief discussion to let you know where we are, because these have been robust discussions, and to memorialize the framework. The members suggested that the board have a role, that this board, full board, have a role in the process moving forward to be able to help direct the broader policy considerations and decisions, which we'll be getting into in the near future. The board working group met in January to hear a recap of the recent staff working group, but also to confirm the proposed framework. And this group met in September to discuss the framework, and overall the board members were supportive of the structure presented by staff. The next steps are to fill in the details of the framework, which will include future board decisions along the way to help guide this process. Now, we all know the devil is in the details. So while the idea of a general framework of a 6-county federal program and a 4-county state program, that's the essential framework that we're talking about today. How will that filter in through project prioritization? And that's really where the devil meets the devil's in the details, and that will come at a later point. Obviously, the details and the project prioritization will include how to incorporate climate, equity, safety, and other elements that are in our guideline and program requirements. It is essential that we meet those requirements. All of the working group acknowledge that these are important elements to address to make sure we meet these regulations and that all SACOG jurisdictions also have the opportunity for funding. So we continue to recognize both at the staff level and at the board working group level that there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach to this, that just doesn't work for our very broad region, but that we can, through really honest and raw dialogue and debate, which we are all, those are the kinds of conversations we are having in both of the working groups, that we can meet climate equity and safety goals in ways that work for our individual jurisdictions. And like I said, we're not at that point yet, but part of our discussions have been, let's take the term of equity. What is the best path for the definition of equity as it relates to funding programs? And we had a very interesting discussion on what equity is and how broad that really is and how that translates to the rural parts of our region, as well as our more urban-centric neighbors, in addition to meeting the broader goals of equity. So both the board working group and the staff are working well together. We're having honest conversations. We're looking to ensure a level of fairness. We're looking to maintain funding opportunities for all jurisdictions while supporting regional goals that are in full compliance with the requirements of these funding. That is critical. So the requested action today comes from the board funding round working group, and that is that the board approve the regional funding framework as outlined in the staff report. And I know there's a lot here, and but generally what's before us is rather simple. It's the 6-county federal program and the 4-county state framework. So does staff have any details they would like to add, or perhaps the staff working group? Oh, Kristen, great.
Hi, yes,
Hi.
I'm here. Thanks for just taking the bull by the horns on that. I do want to Woody Deloria is here, who chairs the staff funding round working group.
Perfect.
And I know he wanted to come up and make a few comments just from the staff working group perspective to support what you've just discussed.
Perfect, thank you.
Morning, Woody.
Good morning. Thank you, Christina. Director Thomas, thank you. Directors, Chair Zaragoza, it's great to see you in that seat. I am Woody Deloria. I'm the Executive Director of the El Dorado County Transportation Commission and also serving as the chair of the staff funding round working group. And I wanted to just express that the staff funding round working group has reached consensus on this kind of high level structure that's before you today. So there's a great deal of collaboration across the 6 counties. The meetings, the interaction has been very, very well attended by all of the jurisdictions. And I think there's been a couple of key takeaways that I have heard, and one being a strong support for this state of good repair focus on the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, federal funds, likely the most valuable fund source that we receive, very flexible. The region recognizes that as we have grown and expanded our infrastructure, we have increased the burden of maintenance of the aging infrastructure system throughout the region. And there was a great deal of support for that, as well as collaborating and prioritizing more regional projects that serve the broader 6 counties here in Sacramento. So the staff working group certainly supports this, and we have a lot of work to do still. There's a lot of details to work out, a lot of herding cats to happen, but they are in support of it. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Deloria. Yeah. Any other comments from the staff perspective?
Nope, I'm here to answer any questions if you have any.
I just have to sing Christina and our staff's praises. This is a complex challenge to work through, and our staff is doing just an incredible job leading both the staff working group and the board working group through this productively. And I really just want to thank you for your leadership and in setting a container to have these discussions that is very productive. And obviously the board working group also approves this framework.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, we're trying to make this a nice, transparent process to make sure that everybody feels like they're along for the ride. It's an interesting journey, both staff and board, with very different perspectives oftentimes. So, as you mentioned, there's a lot of work ahead of us, but we look forward to working with everybody more as it goes on. So thank you.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Yes, Director Desmond.
Just a quick comment, and thank you, Director Thomas and Christina and everybody for their work on this. I think it's very difficult to herd all of these cats, and I appreciate the, I think, level of certainty and flexibility that this provides, and certainly the emphasis on state of good repair and allows, for instance, Sacramento County, you look at us, $900 million maintenance backlog on our unincorporated roadways. It makes it awfully tough for us to attract infill development or interest for any infill project when the roads are in such bad shape. So just appreciate it. Just want to throw that out there. I really appreciate all your work on this, especially including the staff from all the different agencies, both, our county agencies, city agencies, and others. So thank you.
Thank you. So any other comments? Yes, Dr. Vegas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Wendy, for the work and the working group's work. I just wanted to make sure, it's a process question mostly. So the request before us today indicates that the guidelines would be brought to the board for adoption. So within that work, within that framework, are there going to be options available for this board to continue to dialogue, or is the August timeline require that it move forward as recommended by the working group, or will we have options to consider to figure out, because this is a large board, to dialogue further, or is there time sensitivity to the board?
Yeah, I don't have an exact timeline on every step, but we will be taking additional interim decisions to the board as we work through it with both the staff and board funding round working groups, just so that you all are kept in the loop and understand exactly what's happening. We want your support through this. We're not going to just bring something at the end and say here.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Thomas, any other?
I want to thank Director Vegas for that question, but it was really important to both working groups that this be a collaborative process. While, we're working on the board's behalf to kind of get us to the point to bring something to the board, so we have something to discuss. We want this a fully transparent, interactive, collaborative process, because it's got to work for all of us. There's too much at stake. And so we look forward to having the larger discussion at the board level once we get something in a nice package that we can chat about. So that's really important to both working groups.
Thank you. Yes, Director Bafford.
Just want to say I really appreciate kind of the opportunity to take this in bite-sized pieces and bring the framework, very high-level framework, before the board and us to consider that and discuss that. And then once we've approved that, move into more of the details. So I think that's great for something as complex as this. So
Thank you. All right, I'll entertain a motion. All right, thank you, Director Chapman. Have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Wendy, thank you very much. All right, we will go to the next action item, item 10, which is.
Saragosa, sorry
Yeah.
for the
Oh,
interruption.
yes.
There is a public comment.
Yes,
on
I
that item.
apologize on that. We do have, yes, that was my mistake. Mr. or Ms. Montez. Mr. Montez. Apologize.
No problem. Okay, good afternoon. Sorry about that. Good afternoon, Chairman Saragosa and members of the board. My name is Peyton Montez, and I'm here speaking on behalf of the Associated General Contractors of California. Our organization represents approximately 900 contractor and associate members throughout the state. We are here to express our concerns regarding the updated regional funding framework and how it may jeopardize future regional funding if adopted by this board in its current form. Transportation infrastructure connects people to essential opportunities, jobs, vital services, and recreation. It also enables employers to provide critical goods and services to the residents of the region. The Sacramento area is unique in many reasons, one of which is it has 14 job hubs, which account for nearly 50% of regional employment. We've seen that employers that have better connectivity in these job hubs outperform those who don't. SACOG and its board members in the past has made careful and thoughtful decisions on its funding framework and has allowed the region to be competitive, ensuring that state and federal dollars flow to critical infrastructure projects. These decisions have included strategies on how to remain compliant with SB 375 and how by meeting either GHG emission targets or providing an alternative planning scenario, which shows how the target can be met. If the updated funding framework does not make significant changes from the prior framework, the Sacramento region is at risk of losing critical infrastructure dollars. We ask that the board direct staff to engage in regional stakeholders to help find the best choices to include in the new plan that meet emission targets and preserve billions of dollars of future funds. On behalf of the Associated General Contractors of California, we appreciate the opportunity to engage on this issue and look forward to continuing this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Peyton. And we'll make sure that, well, one, I'll make sure that I get my comments in before we close the item.
And Chair,
But
I would
two-
recommend if we could just call the vote again.
Yes, I was gonna, yeah. And also ensure that we do have that open dialogue. So thank you for those comments. So with that, I would re-entertain a motion on this item. Thank you. Second. Second. All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 10, our next agenda item is a review and accept the fiscal year 2022-2023 annual comprehensive financial report and related audits. And Ms. Sue has this item for us. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. SACOG, as a federally designated metropolitan planning organization, is required to undergo an annual financial audit. Also, SACOG is designated as the regional transportation planning agency for the 4 counties. It's also required to perform the annual fiscal audit of the transit funds. The purpose of these audits are to ensure SACOG has the proper internal control process in place to protect its assets from misuse or loss, and also to ensure that the financial statements are accurate and complete. SACOG has engaged 2 independent financial audit firms, I. Bailey and Richardson and Company, to perform the audits of the SACOG financial statement and also the audits of the transit funds. And also prepare the annual comprehensive financial report and the transit financial audit reports, which is included as an attachment for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2023. Staff from I. Bailey presented the audit result at the Policy and Innovation Committees at the February meeting, and there was no action taken due to no quorum. However, it's recommended that the board approve staff actions. And also, staff is pleased to report that the SACOG has received an unmodified or clean audit for both the financial and the transit audits. The annual comprehensive financial report, which is also in short known as ACFR, is included as an attachment A. It includes financial information for SACOG planning and administration funds, which is all related to all SACOG planning activities, and also all the special revenue funds like the transit funds. The ACFR is over 140 pages long. It's kind of just represent a financial report card for SACOG. It describes SACOG work plan and also accomplishment for the fiscal year, and include all the accounting of all the financial activity for SACOG operations and all the transit revenue funds. And then also to be transparent about the use of the taxpayer money. Overall, SACOG received a good grade for its audit reports and the financial audit, as there is no findings related to the financial report or any of the transit-related audit reports. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Loretta. Is there any questions? Yes, Director Branscombe.
Whenever I look at financial statements issued by an organization I'm a director of, I remember the drama I lived through when I was on public company boards, the Enron drama and other drama. And I was just curious, are there steps taken to assure an appropriate level of financial literacy on our audit committee? And that's just a question in the blind, actually. And the other question I have, because there can be potential liability for directors and officers, I'd like to ask council what if any, are the assurances with respect to potential director and officer liability?
I was waiting to see who was going first, so
You're the man.
I'll answer the second part of that question. Essentially, director and officer liability is the same at the SACOG board as it would be at your city councils and or
But
county
what
board of
is it then?
supervisors. So essentially, if there is any, well, there's two levels. One is there are a number of governmental immunities that apply to any discretionary decisions.
Understand.
So to the extent you're making a discretionary decision, governmental immunities would protect you from liability. To the extent there is a claim against any of the directors that's within the scope of services of what you do for SACOG, which would include approving audits, making financial decisions, things like that, then SACOG would have the obligation to defend and indemnify the directors if there were a claim against the directors. So it's really two levels. The first level would be immunity, and the second level would be defense and indemnity from the organization.
Is there anything backing up that indemnity beyond the finances of the organization? Any D&O? Is there any D&O insurance?
Yes, we have insurance. We're part of a JPA risk pool. We can go into that.
It's a good thing to check whenever you go through financial statements. Thank you.
And I can answer part of the first question you had, Director Branscombe. So our Policy and Innovation Committee does serve as the audit committee for the board. And we do, both when members come onto that board, give them an orientation and make sure they have access to information, and we explain the basics of the financials of SACOG. We also make our independent auditors available to them. And our auditors do meet with the chairman of the board or the chairperson of the board every year as well to talk about the audit.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions? Yes, Director Thomas.
I just would like to congratulate you on another, clean audit. SACOG is always exemplary in our financials, and just want to appreciate that and recognize that.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas.
Thank you.
Motion
yes.
to approve.
Thank you, Dr. Preston.
Second.
Thank you. Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Thank you, Loretta. All right. We're going to dive into our information items, and we have two that are pretty lengthy. So I'm going to ask board members or directors to really hold their questions until the end, so that we can hopefully try to get through both of these in a way and get you all out of here in time. So, and we'll see if we can get to item 13 as we move along here. So with that, we're going to start with item 11, which is our refresher on SACOG's REI, Race Equity and Inclusion Initiative. And Casey will be kicking this off.
Actually, Chair Saragosa, I'm going to take the first half of
that's
this,
right.
and we're going to tag team. I'll hand it off to Casey. James
Yes.
Corliss, Executive Director of SACOG. Delighted to be here this morning and give the entire board a refresher. This actually, hopefully you'll see the theme in a lot of our race equity inclusion work is doing a lot of listening and engagement. And one of the things which we heard from board members and REI working group members is to remind the board at the beginning of every year, why are we doing this? What is it? Why is it important? So this is what we consider a best practice, and this is your annual refresher. Next slide. For a couple of years now, the board has had a working group, and here are your 10 board members that serve on the Race Equity Inclusion Working Group and have served in that capacity for the last 14 months. Many of you here this morning. And then next slide. The working group also has external working group members, and this is something that actually in some other working groups, we've really found to be incredibly helpful. And just in terms of the level of engagement and conversation that we have back and forth with some of our external members that have expertise in various pieces of inclusion, of racial equity, of communications, of community engagement. And I want to note that we have two here this morning. We have Woody Deloria, who you've already heard from, and we also have Raul Martinez from Placer County. And we're actually going to ask Raul actually to come up and talk a little bit because he was so instrumental in a piece of this work. Next slide. So I know many of you, when we get, and Director Thomas, you mentioned this in the funding round working group update. Can we use some definitions, right? Can we define what we're talking about here? And so let's go down some of these definitions. And there obviously there's no one single definition, but we do like this definition in terms of equity. So we are talking about fairness and justice at the end of the day, but this is really important, I think. It means recognizing that we do not all start from the same place, and we need to acknowledge and make adjustments to those imbalances. It's ongoing. It requires us to identify and overcome intentional and unintentional barriers from bias and systemic structures. So next slide. We've had a lot of conversation at the board level the last few years about equity versus equality, right? And we hear and recognize that. But one way to think about if process equality is to give everybody the same thing. In some ways to, regardless of the situation somebody's in. And so this is, I think, a helpful illustration. If we just gave everybody the same size bicycle in this situation, that would not be good because people are not starting from the same place. Equity is actually understanding where you start from and what you need. And whether that's by place, by race, ethnicity, or by geography, rural, suburban, and urban, equity really is about understanding that there are serious differences. Next slide. So let's get into racial equity. This gets to the board's racial equity statement of change and commitment that I believe is in front of you and the board adopted back in February 2022. Our definition of racial equity, your definition the board adopted, is when race can no longer be used to predict life outcomes and outcomes for all groups are improved. So that is essentially our vision. And I would suggest to you, I know we can get into definitions and words, but we are trying to achieve equality through equity. Equality is the goal. That's where we're trying to get to, and equity is the process. So next slide. In terms of process equity, right? So what does it mean and how do we apply it? And this actually gets to a lot of our work that the board has engaged in and undertaken this year, and things like the Engage, Empower, Implement program. As a process, we apply racial equity for those who are most impacted by structural racial inequities and meaningfully involve them in the creation and implementation of policies and practices that impact their lives. And you can use, and I want to be very clear, we in our work, and we are taking baby steps here. We are humble and starting this work. But in our work, we start with race ethnicity because the data in our region shows significant disparities by race ethnicity, but we don't end there. We start with race ethnicity, we go to age and income and geography, right? Because all of those, and ability, all of those are through lines through this definition, but we start with race ethnicity, and that's why this is so important in terms of the race equity inclusion work that we're undertaking and the board is engaged in. Okay, next slide. So I want to talk about two things here in terms of what the working group's been involved in the last couple of years, a lot of the discovery that they've undertaken, how this relates, and it gets back to the book right in front of you on your desk that Chair Saragosa just mentioned, but how it relates and shows up in housing and transportation. So this is a map of downtown Sacramento. This is a redlining map. In the 1930s, the Federal Housing Administration undertook a policy called redlining, and it was to take a map and put on that map in cities all across the United States. The red areas there where basically were going to be the riskiest home loans. Those were the areas that were by design where residents of color resided. So redlining was a very common practice in the 1930s and the 1940s. Next slide. But that also then showed up in something else called racially restrictive covenants. And racially restricted covenants, and this is actually a slide from one of our REI working groups, and Vice Chair Soon here actually brought this up. Covenants were actually designed, especially after World War II, and we had a lot of white flight to the suburbs, to restrict the ability of people of color to actually own property. So to generate wealth, to actually have home ownership. And many of those, and this is one I believe from Land Park, one of the covenants, they were throughout the United States. They were used as a tool to suppress home ownership, to segregate neighborhoods. And the point being, we still see the lasting effects of those show up today. Next slide. And here is our, a map of the region, right? I understand, a map of sort of focused in and zoomed in. We still love you, Yuba Sutter. Sacramento, Roseville, and sort of the core of the region, but we can see that we have, and somebody told me this when I got here 7 years ago, we are one of the most diverse regions in the United States. We're one of the most segregated still. And there's all kinds of impacts for, all kinds of reasons for why that is, but housing policy and racially restrictive policies and covenants played a major role in that. Next slide. I was just back in Washington, D.C., the National Association of Regional Councils. I walked by the office building of a group I used to work really closely with, the National Association of Realtors, or NAR. They were on my executive committee years ago. And I was, as we were preparing this presentation, I was thinking about NAR, and I had seen some billboards around here from realtors talking about fair housing and talking about the importance of actually tackling things that still show up today. And this, there's a longer piece on this from NAR, but I found this and thought it was really, really important from the National Association of Realtors. Our neighborhoods are still very segregated. And this is 2020 from the statement. You can see the imprint of redlining from 80 years ago. Many of these discriminatory practices denied opportunities to families to pass on wealth. It's reflected in the home ownership gap today, which is a 30 percentage point gap between African Americans and white Americans. White Americans own 10 times the wealth of African Americans. That's from the National Association of Realtors. There's a lot more to that statement that I would definitely encourage you to look through, and it's important. So next slide.
Before you go to the next slide.
Yeah.
So if you can go back to that one, can you read the second sentence again one more time?
Many of these discriminatory practices denied opportunities for families to pass on wealth.
Okay.
And you can see the imprint of redlining from 80 years ago. That's the second sentence.
So 80 years ago was 2044? I mean, 1944? A lot of us weren't born in 1944. And yet we're still affected by the practices that took place 80 years ago. And we won't really be able to make the change we need to make even in the next 20 years in order to change the impact of an 80-year-old decision. And so, you know, I live by a principle: he or she who is behind in the great race of life must run faster or forever remain behind. There are people who are significantly behind today because of decisions made 80 years ago. And so that's why I really like what we're doing here at SACOG, because we're trying to change that. So I just want to kind of point that out because it's a significant point. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Director Jennings. Next slide. And again, there's a lot of data here, and I will also say that part of the work that's ahead of us is to actually begin to refine some data specifically for our region, but just a few. This is actually from the recent Valley Vision poll. You might remember this poll because we did it in a partnership with Valley Vision. This is basically asking people to self-report if you are struggling to afford rent and mortgage in the 6-county region. And we, again, see these disparities by race, ethnicity, Black, Hispanic, Asian, white, other. Next slide. And statewide, and we want to try to get this data for again, our 6-county region, but statewide, and I think, again, Chair Saragosa, you have mentioned this repeatedly, it shows up in homeownership rates. It shows up in intergenerational wealth in terms of housing. And these are state numbers that basically show Black and Latino residents and families are far less likely to own a home. And so again, how does this relate to us and our region and our work and your jurisdiction's work? It is about trying to figure out ways in which we can help first-time homeowners, people to get into housing. So next slide. We also talked quite a bit about transportation and where does a lot of this historical racial discrimination and bias show up in transportation. I would say, having studied this for quite a long time, it's a little easier to see in housing policy, and even still today, as we showed you the map, sometimes in transportation. But if you remember, we had Charles Brown come and present to both our REI working group and the full board. And one of the things that I really appreciate that Charles was saying was that data bears out that race determines place and place determines health. There's a lot to say about that. There's a lot of really good research on this. Next slide. But if you then kind of dig in, and this is one place where I do think we could even give you some better data here in this region across 6 counties and by jurisdiction, just look at pedestrian safety. So interestingly, over COVID, our amount of driving vehicle miles traveled went down nationally. Pedestrian deaths spiked. Traffic incidents overall spiked, but it doesn't fall evenly. It's very disproportional. So here's where other dimensions of equity come into play. In this case, age. Older adults far more at risk for pedestrian injuries and fatalities. Next slide, please. People of color, Black and African Americans, again, this is nationwide, 72% more likely to have been struck and killed by drivers. And next slide. And by income too, for low-income neighborhoods. Again, we can see this anecdotally in our region, but also through some statewide safety data we can share with the board, that these dimensions of equity really do matter, and they show up in things like traffic fatalities and pedestrian fatalities. So next slide. So you pull all that through. That was a brief synopsis of where the REI working group spent some time in terms of the why. And we come back to the statement of change and commitment that's in front of you that was adopted by the board in 2022. SACOG envisions a Sacramento region where race is no longer a predictor of life outcomes, and outcomes for all groups are improved. And I don't think you could have said that any better than that statement. And we are far away from that, but that is what the vision. So next slide. Okay, so pulling that through, I think, again, very important for this work. You didn't just adopt a statement. The REI working group said we have to actually translate that into actions. Because there's lots of statements that have been adopted, but what are we going to do about it? So the pillars here are to listen and learn, especially from historically marginalized communities in both urban and rural areas. And you hear from a second from Casey, when we do offsite board meetings, we're going around the region. We're doing that because we've heard from all of you that you want to better understand the uniqueness of this region, right? What do disadvantaged and marginalized communities look like? They look different everywhere. But they exist in every county. And it's really important that we really understand and listen and learn. So to plan in terms of the Racial Equity Action Plan, to support our partners and our other local government and partner agencies as they are also on this journey, to build the capacity of the SACOG staff and board to implement the action plan, and finally to measure, which we are still working on as one of the things we're coming up and we'll be back in front of the board this year in terms of our regional progress report. So next slide. All right, so about to hand this off to Casey. So pull it again through to the strategic plan that you adopted in 2022 in the triple bottom line framework of equity, economy, environment. Much of this work shows up in your equity pillar of the triple bottom line. So next slide. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Casey.
Thanks, James. And what I'm going to do is highlight for you as when we were putting together the Racial Equity Action Plan, we did listening and learning with the REI working group, as well as stakeholders, all of our external stakeholders we work with, local governments, our regional business partners, community-based organizations. And so part of the big thing that came out of that is that we really needed to listen and learn. And so a lot of last year, which was your first year of implementing the Racial Equity Action Plan, there was a lot of listening and learning that the board and the REI working group did. So next slide, please. What I want to do is just highlight some of that. If you recall, we did 3 offsite board meetings, and there were workshops that should show up. But if they don't, I can just tell you about them. I have some quotes from there and some awesome pictures. But if you recall, when we went to Roseville, we had a workshop that Director Gore had kicked off for us. And that was thank you very much. That was a case study, right, of Roseville and some of the disparities that Roseville as a community had seen within their community and wanted to try to work on. And if you recall, they started out saying, okay, we think there are some food access issues here, but really in listening and working with the community members in that area, they learned actually it's not a food access issue, it's actually a transportation and other infrastructure issue. And how going through that process of working with their community actually turned into not just investments and improvements there, but they were able to leverage those investments. And the quote that I don't have for you, but it's great, is some of the learning that came out of the board when we would ask how these workshops went. This one is from Roseville. It gave me a broader view of the importance to engage our neglected communities, empowering a collective response to implement creative solutions that connect them to the larger community through investment and awareness. The next slide would be from our tour or our visit to Yuba County and learning about Olivehurst and learning about how, you know, Olivehurst, in Olivehurst government, you know, officials could just go into the community and see when it was raining that people were having to walk in the street and being unsafe. And so then building on that, the work that was happening with blue zones in Yuba and Sutter counties. And so the quote that I have for you there from that workshop, again, from board members responding to these, is, "I learned so much about the area, which will help me make better decisions with a better knowledge base." And I think that is really what we had been hearing over the course of these workshops. Similarly, for the South Sacramento tour, loving the opportunity to see what our funding as SACOG has been able to do. Seeing that makes us understand and broaden our knowledge base. So all of that work that the board has engaged in over the last year, we brought back to the REI working group that was in its first year trying to understand, you know, the guts of what's in the racial equity action plan, but also studying, okay, given everything that we've learned through all of this board work, next slide, please. What are some principles of meaningful community engagement that come out of all that? And I would like to turn it over to one of the public members of the REI working group, Raul Martinez, to share that with you. We invited all our public members to attend, and luckily Raul was able to dedicate some of his time for the day.
Thank you, Raul.
Great, thanks so much. And I think we might need to go back to the slide on meaningful. There we go. But before we get there, thanks so much for inviting me here today. My name is Raul Martinez. I'm the Assistant Director of Placer County Health and Human Services. So thanks so much for the opportunity to serve as an external board member. I also want to express my gratitude to Vice Chair Soon and Director Jennings as well, who serve as committee chairs for the REI working group. You brought, really appreciate your leadership and humility, and also the touch of levity that you bring on this complex topic. And so I think it was Director Jennings at our last meeting who checked in on us a number of times to make sure that we were all in, and we were all in the affirmative, I think several times during that meeting. So thank you very much. Our initial focus as an REI working group has really been to understand the racial equity plan and providing input to the board working group as well as to SACOG staff on how to actually put that into action. And so we've worked on practical suggestions, particularly I think the plan is built into a few parts. And so particularly on the program section of that plan, as Casey noted, in 2023, a key theme was engagement and empowerment. So this involves listening to and learning from those that are impacted by policies and investments, even if they don't participate in sort of traditional civic engagement channels. And this is one example of a traditional civic engagement channel, this meeting here today. As Casey mentioned, back on April the 20th of last year, so I'm sorry I couldn't attend that day. That was my Mrs. Martinez's birthday, and I might have been in a little bit of trouble if I would have missed that. So our Bonnie Gore, who was our former SACOG board member and current Placer County Board of Supervisor member, she did talk about sort of, maybe I'll reiterate sort of a couple of points, the importance of not just attending to, but listening to community. So I think in referencing Invest Health, the initial data scan revealed that that section of Roseville, which I myself live not too far away from, that a food desert was the primary challenge. But when you actually got into community and talked to them, the things that were pressing to them were issues around lighting, right? So being able to see when you're walking around at night, making sure that the sidewalks themselves are functional and walkable, and also having access to clean and safe parks. So it wasn't saying that food access issues weren't a challenge. There were just more pressing challenges, and that through Invest Health, progress was made because the community was listened to. So taking inspiration from that example and a few others, the group engaged in our all-in conversation back in October to establish those principles, which are listed here on the slide. So that was a long windup. Maybe that was the goose gossage of windups here. But and these principles encompass acknowledging past experiences and harms with government, understanding how historical context may influence, maybe even hinder current engagement efforts, despite the good intentions of all of us and public officials and servants. Number two, sort of recognizing the complex diversity within communities, that they're not homogeneous, and tailoring engagement to address varied needs, challenges, and opportunities, and recognizing that connecting in this way can not only deepen understanding, but build trust. Maybe that's one of the cross-cutting principles that is sort of building trust and the importance of it. Number three, building trust and reciprocity with community by promoting transparency and accountability and using feedback. Feedback that can often be viewed as extractive. I actually come from 16 years in the private sector as a research and evaluation consultant. And so it's one of the complaints, and maybe rightful complaints, that we sort of take information but don't ever give it back. And so it's not always clear to community members that who were seeking input from what was done with the time that they spent in providing feedback, and how was that feedback actually put into use. Number four, and maybe this is maybe I'll spend the most verbal airspace on number four, but this was engaging with community on the ground to better understand their needs, leveraging existing trusted networks and organizations. I think many of us here in government, myself included, feel a profound calling to public service, yet we might not always be best positioned to get on the ground and ask questions and listen. Now, I'm not saying not to hit the pavement. That's not it at all. But there may be other players in the system, sort of informal networks, community-based organizations, other civic groups who have established that trust already and can help craft the questions, solicit responses, and also package them in ways that the community itself intends. And I think you saw that example that Supervisor Gore, former Director Gore, highlighted in from the Roseville example last year. And then last, demonstrating the impact, again, of engagement efforts to the community, fostering ongoing reciprocal relationships rather than one-off interactions. So making sure that those are bidirectional relationships and not time-limited and not extractive. So thanks very much for maybe a bit of overtime. So thanks for the opportunity to come and present. And thanks again to our committee chairs for their leadership on this work. So thank you.
Thank you, Raul.
Thank you, Raul. Raul just capped off what happened last year with the REI working group. If you go to the next slide, what I want to briefly touch on is looking ahead to 2024. Maybe the slide won't work. I think we're having technical difficulties. So what I'll share is here are the outcomes that the REI working group has that it's working towards for the end of 2024, because it's a 2-year term that they are all sharing. One is to continue to broaden understanding and support of the Racial Equity Action Plan. Today is in part of that. We are literally implementing the action plan right now with this item. The second is to define meaningful community engagement. As you can see, that definition has been created. There are actually many more bullets that I didn't include in the slide because it was too small to read, but they have made that definition. So a next phase looking into 24 is how do we apply that into SACOG's work, into building our SACOG's capacity to assess equity impacts of proposed policy decisions, and also how do we translate all of that into how we design and execute our programs. Oh, thank you. The third one that I skipped is working on regional equity indicators that will be included in regular reporting. That is, SACOG has a regional monitoring report that we used to do about every 3 to 4 years. The Racial Equity Action Plan calls for us to do that annually. So this year we are trying to set up both the system for that as well as the first report out of that. And then lastly, the REI working group is to recommend any changes to the action plan to increase its effectiveness and impact. These outcomes come straight out of that action plan, which again, this board and the REI working group developed. So as you can see, there's a lot of through lines from the very beginning of the racial equity statement all the way through to the implementation. And then finally, if you go to the next slide, what that translates into as far as what you're going to be working on or seeing related to the Race Equity Inclusion Initiative is, of course, to continue the offsite board meetings, because we have really seen the power of that. And the tour, there's always one tour as a called for in the action plan, will be in Woodland next month. You will, of course, have the Color of Law book discussion. We will be looking, as I said, at how we can apply these principles of community engagement to program evaluation and also the design of SACOG programs. And then first regional progress report is going to be developed and published. With that, my last slide I leave off on, and perhaps this is where I hand it back to our board leadership. Chair Jennings, when he first stepped up to chair the working group back in 2021, their very first meeting, he asked everyone to give them a word of what they wanted to come out of the work, because we were building a foundation. And so this is the result of all of that. So you can see what we are trying to continue to do is honor that in building in that work and implementing the Race Equity Inclusion Initiative. Thank you.
I want to thank the staff for the great work that they've done in presenting this today. Today is an opportunity for us just to kind of give an update to the work that we've done. And what you can help us with is you can tell us, are we on the right path? Are we on the right track? Are we doing the things that need to be done in order to impact the game plan that we have? And so we really want to hear from you, even if it's not today, we want to hear from you on an ongoing basis. Do we have the right foundation? If I were to ask you right now, what would you add to our foundation? Is there anybody that has a word that they can give us today that we can add to the foundation of the work that we're doing every single time that we work here to create a vision where equity and equality is for everyone? So I think you have one. Okay.
Because again, in the world of water quality, safe drinking water is an important thing. In the San Joaquin, there have been efforts to reach out to communities of color, communities who are dependent on groundwater as their source of drinking water, which have nitrates in them. But communities come together, and they come together organically, right? And you can't say to a community, you know what, let's move you over here because the water quality is better, the drinking water is better over here. And there's apprehension because the programs have been done through schools and other things to reach out to these communities to get them to do free well testing through women, infant, and children, through self-help enterprises. And so it continued engagement, but encouragement and finding, I think I heard this, finding that person within the community that is a trusted source. So encouraging folks to, get outside of their comfort zones.
I like that. I like that. I'd love to have a couple more, if there's any more that you can give us to build a foundation that we're already working on, but the work is not done. We've got a long time. Sir.
Yeah, Director Jennings, thank you. I would throw the word collaboration up there. I think we can see the level of work that what we're faced with. And I think that we can't do this alone, right? And that we're going to have a network of people to help us through this process. And the importance of collaboration, I think, exemplified in this board and the work that we do and moving a lot of the processes and policies forward. We set the example for that. And I think collaboration with nonprofits, community-based organizations, our own cities, when we go back, our own counties, is an important piece as well.
Gotcha. I'm looking for one more. I just need one more. One more foundation builder.
I'll give you one.
Okay.
How about intensive listening, right? So I think part of what we often get confused by is the fact that as elected leaders, respectively, in our jurisdictions, the tendency is to want to believe that we should have the answer. The reality is there's much more that we don't know, and we only get more informed by actively listening in a way that kind of culminates here today, right? I mean, I think the fact that this in and of itself, conversation is more normal today than it was certainly 12 months ago, didn't exist 24 or 36 months ago, from my understanding. I'm relatively new, but I think the idea of actually forcing a conversation as an agenda item in front of everybody here today begins to it does all of what's on the brick wall today. Thank you, Rick.
I got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. I gotta listen twice as much as I talk. I got you. I like that. All right, so I've got from you today encouragement, collaboration, intensive listening, and I hear I have a fourth.
I was gonna say respect.
Oh, man.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
respect.
Tell me why.
I think it's just important that we respect, everyone in our community, and you're talking about equality and equity and so forth. I just think respect is an important piece of that.
So I asked for 3 or 4 today. Thank you for that. At any point in time, whether it's a working group member from SACOG or whether it's one of our community members, please whisper in our ear, please get involved. Please read the book. And I want to thank our chair for giving us The Color of Law, because this opens up a whole nother door for us to read and understand. But please get involved in this. This is probably some of the most important work that we do. And so when I made the point about the 80 years, the impact of the decisions that were made and the impact that that decision still has on us today, if we don't move faster to address change, who will? So if it's going to be, it's up to me. I'm willing to do it all. But when I got my team with me, I can do a whole lot more. We can do a whole lot more. And so thank you for the presentation.
Thank you. Yes, Vice Chair Zoom.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I also want to acknowledge and thank already died Chair Jennings and the work of our SACOG staff on everything that's been done today. It just impressed upon me the statement that was made by the National Association of Realtors. That acknowledgement is powerful to me, and I think all of us, in this room, if you're not involved directly with the Realtors organization, you are indirectly, and you're very familiar. And the home building industry, the acknowledgement there that they played and things that had happened. And, me as a person of color myself, I grew up in this area, just obviously after 1944, but, as kids, you grow up in the system that you're born in, and you don't pay much mind. But I did notice growing up playing soccer, when I played, teams from Roseville or Lamb Park, whatever, I noticed like only our team had, different color ethnicities on our team. And when I went to high school, I noticed that, hey, how come, only certain high schools had, more kids of color? It was not a big deal. You go to college and, I met people from Del Campo or Rio Americano or, wherever, and they always knew either I went to Kennedy or McClatchy. So it was this common, known thing. And I'm tying it all back to, what James showed on that board right there, that deed of trust. I was talking to my friend now, he's son of former mayor, county supervisor Jimmy Yee, lives in Lamb Park. I talked to him about the work we were doing here, and he said, man, that stuff's still on the deeds today. And I said, really? He said, show me. And he showed me. And that's what I brought, to the group. And so all of this, and then just flipping through this book, I flipped to one page and it talked about the Federal Highway Administration and things that were done. So I'm just connecting the dots only now. And someone that, I always thought of, hey, we just put our heads to the grindstone. We can, make our way. And I still think that's true. I still believe that's true. But I think there's this greater recognition of the field, even playing field, that field that was set many decades ago, that none of us in this room would have known the impacts generations down the road. And so I just bring that all to your attention as, sometimes this stuff is hard to, look at. We're all busy with our lives, so it's easier, to not look at. But I myself am coming to a greater realization of the importance and the impact of things that were done way before us. So I encourage us all to continue down this path of education and appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Any other comments? Yes, Director Branscombe.
Thank you. Can you go back to, I think it was the second slide that James was speaking to?
That
Was
might
it
be
the one on equality and equity. Get back to that slide.
Was it the?
Is it working?
The graphic? or was
That's
it
the graphic, please.
You should have it in front of you, I think.
Okay. There, you mentioned, you compared equality and you characterized it as equal outcomes and equity otherwise. And I think that, well, equality, I don't know anybody who argues in favor of equal outcomes for everybody. That's, so equality classically and constitutionally is equality of opportunity. And you go back to the redlining. Redlining got in the way of equality of opportunity, equal opportunity. There should be equal opportunity, and the redlining got in the way of it. So in fact, equality in that sense is a fundamental part, I believe, of an equity argument.
Thank you, Director. Any other comments? Yes, Dr. Duffy.
Just really quickly, I also want to thank staff. I'm very honored to be a part of this work. And I just want to point out that there are efforts around this subject matter that sometimes can be divisive. But the one thing I like about our efforts, it's a very unifying thing. That's what I've really come to appreciate it and to appreciate about it. And I would say part of that because of our esteemed chair's, leadership as a coach, bringing people together. But I would also encourage other board members who have an interest, I hope I'm not out of school here, is come and sit in with us on the work group meetings. And I really appreciate you bringing this book out because, this book, for those who haven't read it, it's not an ideological book. It is really a dispassionate survey of laws and strategies and private party contracts and association efforts and government entities enforcing those racist practices. And the important thing about it is that it has a legacy that exists today. A lot of these practices are gone. They're not legal. They're have been found to be unconstitutional, but the legacy persists, and that's why it's important for us in our work at SACOG. So, thank you.
So if I may build on that point just for a second, the next opportunity to participate in one of the events that we're doing is on March the 21st, where you can come to the annual Racial Equity Action Plan Tour. And you have a sheet in front of your paper, in front of you right now, that talks about the time of that tour. And I know how busy all of us are. I know that. And I know the greatest gift that you'll ever give anyone is your time. I know that. And so if you can take time to come to one of these tours and see what's going on in Roseville, in Yuba City, in Woodland, in Yolo County, if you can come and see it, you'll kind of start really understanding the work that we're doing and why we're doing it. Because if change is going to happen, then we got to be the change we want to see. It's got to be with us. So I'm gonna stop preaching for the day. And I want to thank you for listening to us and hearing the presentation. I think we've done good work. We're trying to get to the edge of being able to say that we're doing great work. So we're still working. So you can become a part of the team in order to help us go from good to, everybody say, great. Thank you.
Chair Saragosa, one last thing, if we
Yes.
can. Feedback is always important to us in small ways and big. And so if you can just fill out the sheet you have in front of you, just on this presentation itself. When Casey read those quotes from the offsite board meetings, that was from these sheets. Well, we'll get it to you. Okay, we will definitely get it to you. All right, and thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just say, it's a great honor to work with our coach and our vice chair on the REI committee. I can't think of a better leader for it, and Director Jennings. And so thank you. Thank you to the outside group. Raul, thank you so much for being here this morning and providing your feedback. You can tell it wasn't just lip service from the outside groups. They were involved. They've taken that leap in with the rest of us. And so thank you so much for that, and more to come. Okay. Again, we're pushing up on time, so I'm going to ask for everyone's grace to maybe stay a little bit longer today so that we can get through our blueprint conversation. Just a lot of work, and so we will go from there. So with that, item 12 is our 2025 blueprint, where we've been, what we've learned, and where we're headed. And Mr. Miller has this for us again.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Members of the board, thank you for the opportunity to present to you all an update on our Metropolitan Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy, or MTP-SCS, or as I'll be referring to it from here on out, the 2025 Blueprint. So for this presentation, my colleagues and I are going to be focusing on the three overarching questions as it relates to the 2025 Blueprint of where we've been, what's at stake, and where we're going. So you can see the agenda up here in front of you today. For the sake of time, I'm going to just skip through this, and we'll get to each of these items as they come along. So what is the 2025 Blueprint? So one of SACOG's main jobs, as designated by the federal government, is to maintain a regional transportation plan that must be updated every 4 years in coordination with each local government in the region. So this plan really outlines recommendations for public land use policy, as well as transportation investment strategies for the SACOG region for the next 20 to 30 years. And this also includes what's called a sustainable community strategy, or an SCS, which demonstrates how the region could achieve the state mandated greenhouse gas emissions reductions through integrated land use and transportation planning. So the plan, it's really important here to note that the plan is really going to be shaped by the triple bottom line goals for equity, economy, and environment as outlined in the policy framework that this board adopted last year. So this plan is really going to aim to come together around a collective vision to advance economic prosperity, support environmental health and resiliency, and promote equity through reducing transportation and housing disparities across the region. For the sake of time, I'm going to skip a few of these slides. So what's at stake in the 2025 Blueprint? So SACOG's target for greenhouse gas reduction is stated as a percentage decrease in per capita greenhouse gas emissions as compared to the year 2005. So the greenhouse gas reduction target for the SACOG region was set by the California Air Resources Board at 19% per capita by 2035. And it's important to note here that for all three previous versions of this plan, the RTP-SCS or MTP-SCS, we showed that this region would achieve the greenhouse gas reduction target if the plan were to be implemented. Oops, going back one. So if the SCS would not meet the regional target, then SACOG must prepare what's called an alternative planning strategy, or an APS, that shows how the region could potentially meet the target, but why that's not feasible. So beyond the cost of preparation and maintenance of the alternative planning strategy, the main risk to SACOG and its member agencies would be the potential loss of competitive grant opportunities moving forward. And there are several state funding programs that require the region have an adopted sustainable community strategy, not an APS, not an alternative planning strategy, in order to compete for this funding. So the funding sources at risk if the regional greenhouse gas reduction target cannot be met and an alternative planning strategy must be prepared include competitive transportation funding programs created under Senate Bill 1 and other funding programs funded by California's Cap and Trade program. So since 2018, as you can see up here on the slide, the SACOG region has received over $500 million in transportation funding from these state competitive grant programs that require an adopted sustainable community strategy. So over $500 million in funding for important transportation projects throughout the region is at stake if we can't hit our greenhouse gas reduction target. And with that, I'd like to pass it on to my colleague, Dov Caden, to provide an overview of the pathway efforts that was undertaken last year that I'm sure many of you are familiar with.
Great. Thank you, Dov.
Great. Good morning. My name is Dov Caden. I'm going to be diving into a very quick, hopefully, review of our growth pathways that we explored last year. Sometimes scenario planning exercises, they can kind of feel like we're looking at somewhat similar futures, and then decision makers are asked to pick the one in the middle, right? That was very much not what we were trying to do with this process. We really wanted to just take a step back and think through, what could the bookends of potential growth patterns and transportation networks actually look like? So do not think of these as a menu. We're not going to be picking one of these off of the shelf. We're going to be crafting a whole new set of assumptions as a part of the deliberations this year. You can think of them more as crash test dummies to better understand how the different ways that we grow will impact the extent to which we can actually accomplish our triple bottom line goals, including our greenhouse gas reduction target that was just referenced. And Clint's going to get a little bit more into that after me. So here are the three pathways. You can kind of think of them as going from most dispersive on the left to most compact on the right. Pathway 1 is called outward expansion and limited infill. This is in many ways an extrapolation of the growth dynamics that we saw in the early 2000s, where we were really exploding as a region outwards. Vast majority of growth happening via expansion into our greenfield developing communities and to a certain extent our rural residential areas. Pathway 2 is called balanced infill and phase expansion. That was a pathway that explored a future where some growth was accommodated via outward expansion, but we really balanced that growth with lots of robust infill, revitalization of our existing communities. This was also an attempt for us to kind of recreate the basic growth pattern that we had from the adopted plan that did hit our target. And then pathway 3 is called focused infill and limited expansion. And that was a future where the vast majority of growth was occurring in infill areas. Expansion wasn't happening, but it was only in areas that were already under construction. So a really key point, just to reiterate here, is that all three of these pathways have the same amount of regional growth. And all three pathways are well within what is already allowed in your local plans. When you add up all of the allowed capacity in general plans, specific plans, master plans, you actually have order of magnitudes more capacity in this region than we actually expect to happen between now and 2050. And that's the case in infill areas, that's the case in developing communities. So saying this another way, all three of these pathways are implementing your local plans. They are consistent with your local plans, but they're just being, the growth is being phased in very different ways. I'm going to go ahead and skip this slide actually, just for the case of, for time, but we do have a presentation coming up next month at Lunar that is really going to dive a lot more into the product type question, kind of the underlying demand questions, which I know was a big topic of conversation back when we discussed this at the Roseville offsite meeting last March. So what have we learned through this whole process? We've done several presentations now that are kind of evaluating the performance of these three different pathways across a whole suite of the triple bottom line indicators, from environmental resilience and wildfire risk to kind of the fiscal implications of actually paying to maintain this infrastructure, to the public health implications. We're going to focus today entirely on the greenhouse gas question. It's a key performance indicator, as Zach was just mentioning. It's how we're regulated by the state. Lots of state funding is on the line for us demonstrating how we can achieve this 19% reduction from passenger vehicles by below 2005 levels. So the primary mechanism by which our plan reduces greenhouse gas emissions from transportation is through reducing what's called vehicle miles traveled, or VMT. It's just a metric for how much and how far the average household is driving on a daily basis. We know that where growth occurs has a really big impact on VMT because, unsurprisingly, VMT is lower in places where there's lots of existing jobs and services and destinations that are in kind of closer proximity. And then that VMT tends to be higher the further that you get away from those destinations. This is another way of kind of showing that point here. This is VMT per capita for each of SACOG's community types relative to regional average. Regional average is shown in the dotted line in pink there. As you can see, we have the lowest VMT in our centers and corridors. So, think of those as kind of our main streets, downtowns, commercial corridors, transit station areas, right? And that VMT gets higher as you go to established communities, then developing communities, then rural residential. So the amount of growth that goes to each of these community types is really important. Centers and corridors and established communities together, they kind of make up what we think about as infill areas. Developing communities, that's more of your kind of greenfield outward expansion, right? And just some really back of the envelope numbers here, right? Our adopted plan, where we hit the target, we have about a third of growth in red, a third of growth in gray, and a third of growth in yellow or in purple, sorry, with just a little bit of rural residential growth. We know, and Clint's going to touch on this, that it's going to be even more challenging to hit our GHG target than in the last plan. So if we are going to give ourselves a chance at actually hitting that target, we ideally need to have at least 2/3 of our growth happening in those red and gray areas. That's not to say that we won't have any growth in greenfield developing communities. We certainly will. But hitting our target, means that we're going to have to be really strategic about, how much growth is being assumed in those purple areas and how that growth is actually phased. So just digging a little bit deeper into that question of developing communities, just as all existing communities are not the same, not all developing communities are the same, and that's particularly true when it comes to VMT. There's actually quite a bit of variation in the VMT performance of each of our region's developing communities that depend on a whole suite of factors. How dense is and compact is the growth in that plan. The extent to which the specific plan is kind of planned as a complete community with, jobs and services, destinations, as well as just homes, rather than just kind of a bedroom community where folks are living, but then traveling elsewhere for their daily needs. And then really importantly, their proximity to jobs and services around them, right? The spatial efficiency question, where is the plan in the region relative to other stuff? This slide is showing that variation. This is from Pathway 1 with some plans coming in right around regional average, and then others coming in as high as 180% of regional average. So we're using Pathway 1 performance here just because it had growth in all of these plans. So it kind of gives you a full spectrum or the full picture of kind of how these plans are performing on VMT. But just to be clear, we are not going to be able to include growth in all of these plans and hit our target. Lots of caveats here. This is showing the outputs from our travel model, right? This is not build out, so it's highly predicated on, SACOG is the amount of growth that's assumed in each of those plans, although there was robust growth in each of these for Pathway 1. And it also depends on, the planned growth around it. But the larger point is this, that VMT is usually higher than regional average in developing communities. And how much higher does vary quite a bit. So it does matter which developing communities are included for the purposes of actually hitting our GHG target. There's going to be all kinds of factors at play for what growth in these plans is included. We're going to be having a robust discussion as a board over the next months here. For example, developing community growth that is literally already under construction, that's going to be included in the plan regardless, right? That's not really a policy choice. But we know that there is way more capacity that in these areas than will actually occur. So for the places where there is more uncertainty, VMT performance and how that VMT impacts our ability to hit our GHG target is going to be a key consideration for you as we start to narrow in on a single set of assumptions. So Clint is going to talk a little bit more now about how close we are to actually hitting that target.
I have a data gap. As job centers grow, does VMT go down?
Absolutely, yes. So part of
is
what
this predicated on existing job centers? Because I imagine that as Bosch comes to Roseville and develops and the energy and the businesses come, that VMT is gonna, from Bickford Ranch, is not gonna be as 150%. It's gonna be less. Correct?
Yes, that is correct. And I think what you're highlighting is that there are growing pains as you start to expand outward. And it takes sometimes a long time even for these specific plans that have planned job growth and are planned as complete communities. It takes a lot of time for them to become complete communities, right? And so I think that's the point here is that if we include growth a little bit in every single community, it doesn't give the opportunity for each of the developing communities to become complete communities over time.
Also, Director Haddishell, as we've been diving into this as staff, I mean, one of the things that I think you're hitting on was interesting is, you had tremendous growth in Placer County, right, in the last few years. So that is going to absolutely get picked up and reflected. And if we're looking at it from a VMT perspective, one of the things we would, as a region, need to see is that job growth to balance that out. So that's it. If we think about you all are unique communities and what do you each contribute, Bosch and more in Placer, those jobs, even the Sacramento State campus actually becomes very important to actually manage the VMT.
So I want to talk just briefly, and I know this is an inch deep on things that warrant a lot more discussion, but we have a lot more coming over the course of the next year, which we'll talk a little bit in your packet, and we'll give you a much better idea of the discussions coming your way. But I wanted to talk a little bit about just comparison to the last plan, we've talked about, there's a lot of work we have to do to get to the greenhouse gas target. And I want to put that into some context here. So this is the pathways, what we saw our pathways kind of stacking up to when you're just isolating that transportation and land use interaction. And where are they stacking up against that 19% greenhouse gas target? And in the blue here, you can see that is where we are getting that transportation, land use interaction, shortened vehicle trips. You've got employment next to housing, so people aren't having to drive as far to access that opportunity. The last plan, when you looked at just those land use and transportation interactions, we were getting something closer to like a 15% of our target there. We're not seeing that even from the pathways, even from pathway 3, that's a more aggressive infill pathway. And there's some reasons behind that. One of the reasons is we've for this plan, we went and really looked again at the growth this region could be expecting over the next decade, 2 decades, 3 decades. And our region is slowing down on growth. We're not seeing the same growth that we planned in the last. And that is not a regional phenomenon. That's a global phenomenon. We're seeing slowing birth rates. It's a California phenomenon. Population in California is not growing the way it used to. There are exceptions in our region. Placer County is still one of the fastest growing county in the state, right? But as a region, growth is slower. And what we need to see changes in VMT or the access to jobs from housing and things like that is you need development activity, not just for new residents, right? But you're putting employment into communities that are already starting to build out. You've got a lot of resident there. Employment is kind of hot on the heels. That's the next phase. So you need kind of that development activity so that people have more access to things. And with less growth, you just have less opportunity to see that happen. So the built environment is slower to change, slower to catch up. And we're talking about 2035, right? So that's fixed in time. So how might we actually close the gap on this? It is not all about transportation and land use alone. There are other strategies that we've got to explore. Now, there's some optimization of the land use transportation interaction that we absolutely want to look at and see if we can gain some more performance out of the plan. That what will eventually come to you is like a discussion scenario to kind of toss around and then over the course of the year develop into a preferred scenario. So TDM and car sharing. This is a strategy in our current plan, and I've got some examples that I just want to briefly walk through on kind of what these programs look like in your plan. TDM, this would be things like what SACOG has funded in the past. We have Spare the Air programs. We have Guaranteed Ride Home programs that give people, if you do want to opt out of driving your car and take transit, but you know you might have to get home quickly because you've got kids that, you know, got sick at school or something, you have a guaranteed ride home. So if you took transit and it's not going to work for you to get home, you can call in, get home safely. That has been shown that it does encourage the use of transit. Spare the Air Days also kind of gets folks paying attention. They know, you know, maybe I want to take transit today, maybe I want to stay home today and not get in my car. All of these have impacts for helping reduce VMT, even if those programs, that's not the main goal of the Spare the Air program, right? It's to let people know, hey, there's a health issue out in the world today. Maybe stay home or change your travel patterns. But the main goal of that was not to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but it absolutely has the additional co-benefit. The other strategy we have, things like ITS and TSM. So these would be things like 511 travel support and wayfinding that give people an idea of a shorter option to get to where they're going. There's lots of things that we have funded through the regional funding program that kind of help support these programs. Some of our I can't remember, the CMAs that help offer benefits, employer benefits and things like that to employees that choose to take an alternative to driving to work. Bike share, scooter share. When we launched the bike share in our region back in 2018, 2019, we had the second highest ridership in the world, second only to Paris. That went belly up for a number of reasons, but we've seen a resurgence of that. And those things absolutely do have an impact, especially now as you're seeing more electric versions, electric bikes, and the e-scooters. It kind of extends the distance people are willing to travel by those modes. And that starts to have an impact on greenhouse gas as well. School bus recovery is something that we haven't included in previous plans, but it came up here, and it actually shows a lot of promise. When we looked, kind of dug into it, between back in 2010, more than 10% of kids were riding school buses. That declined over the decade and declined even further through the pandemic to what we're seeing today is I think less than 1% of kids on school buses. If we can just get back from, I think, 1% to roughly, I think it was 14% of students on buses, that will have an impact on greenhouse gas emissions. Not only that, it will have an impact on congestion in the morning. It will have an impact on safety because you may not have as many vehicles around those schools. This is something we need to dig into a lot more. We don't understand this issue, and it's an incredibly complicated issue at the state, how this is paid for, how it's funded, but it absolutely shows promise for helping us achieve our greenhouse gas target. Reducing transit fares can also either in whole or for various groups can also be one of the strategies we might want to look at. And then pricing and getting away from fuel-based taxes as a way to pay for transportation. This did not originate as a greenhouse gas reducing strategy. We're looking at the potential, the Legislative Analyst's Office just came out with a report that we're looking at the potential to see a reduction in our transportation programs, our funding out of the state. Things like the STIP, which is one of the programs that you make decisions on in this region, could lose up to 60% of its funding just through the shift that the state is planning for from combustion engines to electric engines. If we're fuel-based and these electric vehicles are not paying their fair share anymore, we could see up to 60% of the funding that comes to this region reduced. Now, there is registration fees and things like that, and if you look at the LAO report, those just aren't making up the full gap when you compare them to kind of the projections for state policies. So, but these were really about a way of modernizing the way we pay for transportation, making sure we have enough money to maintain what we have and build what we have and operate it. But when you have those out there, they're also a management tool. You can think about it a little bit the way utilities work, right? You may pay more or less depending on the impact that you have on the system, the time that you're using that system, the location that you are. It gets away from a kind of a one-size-fits-all on the fuel-based to a mileage-based, user-based system that allows some demand-responsive flexibility in how you operate. Now, there's a lot of questions about privacy here. There's a lot of questions about the impact to households, particularly lower income households. Those are things that we need to really dig into to understand not just the greenhouse gas impact, but what's the impact to quality of life to the households in this region. And that is something that the board in the last plan, when they agreed, yeah, let's put pricing in the plan. We think we need to be part of that conversation, but let's not jump into it without doing that groundwork to understand what the impacts are. And that's something that we need to continue working towards. And then telework is a huge part of a huge shift that we've seen recently. And telework it's not a silver bullet. We're seeing big increases. I think we were assuming less than 10%, around 7% were working at home or telework pre-pandemic is what we've had in prior plans, even going up to a quarter or better in this plan that we're seeing. That is the telework, the form that takes has a big impact on VMT. And we've actually seen like part-time telework has higher average VMT than even people commuting to the office. And one of the reasons for that is when you're commuting to the office, a lot of times you do what's called trip chaining, right? You hit the grocery store on your way or you pick your kids up on the way. Well, now if you're teleworking, a lot of those trips are happening from home. So this isn't all about commute traffic, right? But you're going to get the kids, then you come back, then you go to the grocery store, you come back. Add that up, you might have more VMT at the end of the day. Additionally, if you're part-time VMT or part-time hybrid, you might drive to the office and drive back. And the fact that you were only at the office for 4 hours and then you're back at home for 4 hours, your VMT was the same. So it's a complicated topic, but there are quite a few folks that have the ability to work full-time at home. And I think there are programs and policy support that we can figure out that kind of encourage employers to incentivize that type of telework, maybe to reduce other trips And so this still has a lot of promise for helping us reduce greenhouse gas. And I know by the time I kind of built all this out, it gets a little bit cluttered here. So there's a table here that kind of also shows the ranges on kind of what we think we could achieve through each of these as far as adding up to that 19% greenhouse gas. Each one of these things will need a deeper dive, a deeper discussion with the board to kind of understand what are the programs that need to go into the plan to back these up, to justify these considerations. You may also wonder, you know, when I look at the school bus recovery, 0.1% of 19% seems quite small, but that's an increase of over 300% in mode share of kids getting to school. So it's a big change. But when you look at it at a per capita basis across the entire region, it's meaningful, but it isn't 10% of the 19, right? So we kind of have to kind of understand what the ranges are and then also understand these policies from what are the other reasons that we want to do them, right? They don't always have to focus on just the greenhouse gas side. So that was a very short primer on what we're looking at on kind of comparing the last plan to this plan, what that gap is, and the strategies that we'll talk to you about over the next roughly 8 to 9 months as we work on developing the preferred scenario, what will ultimately be this plan. And then I think I'm gonna, kick it to Zach and he'll walk you through kind of what we're gonna see over the next handful of months.
All right, so we're using what we learned from the pathways effort, and we're really working towards a single set of land use and transportation assumptions at this point. And that will eventually become the final scenario in, October, November that you heard about a little bit earlier today. So I'm going to walk through some of the specific items, board action items, as well as opportunities for engagement and feedback that are up here on this schedule. I'll try to do it as quickly as possible. So Dov already mentioned next month, the Cascadia Partners presentation that will happen at Lunar. Next month also Lunar, Transportation, and the Policy and Innovation Committee meetings will be presented a comprehensive report out on the phase 1 outreach and engagement activities that were conducted last year. And also included in that presentation will be how the feedback and data gathered during that extensive outreach and engagement will inform this plan, the MTPSCS, the blueprint. So let's get to the April item here, the discussion scenario. So this presentation will really be your first look at a single set of land use and transportation assumptions. And this will also include how the scenario, this discussion scenario, performs relative to our greenhouse gas target. So it's important to note here that we are in the midst of our second round of engagement with local agency staff to review the land use assumptions for this scenario, and this engagement will continue through March. Moving along to the first board action item that we'll be bringing to you this year as it relates to the blueprint land use and transportation assumptions that will occur in June. So this item will include a presentation on the revised discussion scenario, which will include a single set of land use and transportation assumptions based on board direction from the April presentation on the discussion scenario and the staff-to-staff engagement on both the transportation project list and land use project assumptions that would also be occurring concurrently kind of during that time. So the action that we're going to be asking the board to take at this meeting in June will be to approve the land use assumptions that will form the basis for the final scenario. So as I mentioned before, leading up to this meeting, we'll be incorporating board direction and working with jurisdictional staff throughout the region to really hone in on these land use assumptions. And it's really important to get the land use locked in at this time because these assumptions, those land use assumptions, will help inform the transportation projects included in the plan that will subsequently be refined following adoption of the land use assumptions. So then in September, we'll be bringing you a presentation on the draft final scenario. This is an info item in September, and this will incorporate the outcome of the staff-to-staff engagement and as well as the board direction on the transportation projects included in the plan that will occur in June through July. And then finally, we'll ask you all to adopt the final scenario in October or November of this year. And I will note that ahead of the March committee meetings, I will be developing and I will be distributing a more detailed and really annotated schedule similar to this, but with annotation to provide, additional details on all of these items, the presentation, action items, so on and so forth. So with that, I'd like to open it up to any questions.
Sorry. I'm gonna switch it up a little bit and take public comment first. So we'll go to public comment and Oscar Ballinger, 350 Sacramento.
Chair Saragosa, I understand that we were going to limit public comment this
To
morning for
2 minutes.
information items.
Yeah,
Is
trying
that
to.
correct?
So 2 minutes of time. I apologize for that, but
I'll have to modify on the fly.
absolutely.
Good morning, directors. I'm Oscar Balaguer with 350 Sacramento. We're a climate advocacy 501c3, and of course, we're very interested in greenhouse gas reduction. So based on staff's really great presentation, it looks like SACOG's SCS might not meet the mandated reduction target. And we could lose transportation funding, including for transit and active transportation projects, which would actually reduce GHGs. We're asking you to do whatever it takes to meet that target. First, we've got to do our share to fight back climate change, which is what the state is mandating. And we need that funding to support transportation projects, which are the foundation of our regional prosperity. You have many tools. Infill seems to be the biggest source of potential GHG reductions. And we know that you have hard decisions before you. You need to ask staff to present you with difficult choices. There are silver linings. Infill has many byproduct benefits, which I don't have time to list today, but I think you're well familiar with them, and I think I'm preaching to the choir on the benefits. I actually, I know you haven't noticed, but actually I'm in my retirement years. And I'm blessed because I live in one of the old trolley car suburbs. That means I'm in walking distance to a grocery, a pharmacy, restaurants, coffee shops. A little further off, there's major retail and a movie theater. Nowadays I watch the baby carriages roll by, and I am very happy that I know that I can age in place right where I am, where I've been living. It's a big benefit for me. Two of my neighbors grew up. They're my age. They grew up on the block where I live. That's the kind of neighborhood you can have in your jurisdictions. Please involve us. We know you have a difficult task in front of you. We want to help, and please involve us through robust public participation programs. And thank you for your work.
Thank you. Next is Ralph Proper.
Yeah, hello, everyone. Yeah, I'm Ralph Proper. I'm a board member of Breathe California Sacramento Region, formerly Lung Association. I was an air pollution research specialist to the California Air Resources Board, where much of my work focused on health effects of near-road air pollution. The Sacramento region is designated as non-attainment for both ozone and fine particulate matter, PM 2.5. We actually have the worst potential for ozone pollution of any region in the country based upon our topography and our weather, climate, and levels even higher in the suburbs, Placer and El Dorado counties. A lot of bad health effects result from that. Even worse for our health than summer ozone smog is the impact from fine particulate matter, causing death from cardiovascular disease, especially in older people like me. And living near busy roads also stunts children's lung growth and leads to more asthma. These are permanent impacts, and it's interesting after hearing about the REI here, because if you look at the map, that's where people of lower economic status tend to be concentrated closer to the major roadways. Last week, the US EPA revised its health-based fine particle standard from 12 to 9 micrograms per cubic meter based on the latest science of that harm that's caused by fine PM. And as we heard, the failure to achieve the standard will jeopardize SACOG's ability to get federal transportation funds based on lack of conformity with the Federal Clean Air Act. And what is the overwhelming source of erosion in PM 2.5? Well, yeah, of course, it's vehicular emissions, especially diesel exhaust. We applaud SACOG staff for its efforts to develop the 2025 blueprint to include more infill land use, especially transit-oriented and allowing for more active transportation. In order to improve the health of our residents, we must reduce vehicle miles traveled. We look forward to your efforts ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sue Teranishi.
Hello there. My name is Sue Teranishi, and I'm here as a board member representing the Sacramento Area Bicycle Advocates, known as SABA. The mission of SABA is to make the Sacramento region a safe, enjoyable place for people of all ages to ride their bicycles for daily transportation. We build community, encourage cycling, and advocate for accessible streets for all people in the region. We know that getting people on bicycles for daily transportation makes them healthier and also builds healthier communities. So we're very concerned about the SACOG regional plan meeting the greenhouse gas reduction target goals. We need many more active transportation projects in the region to encourage safe walking and bicycling. Closing gaps in existing infrastructure would go a long way to make it safe, easy, and fun for everyone from 8 to 80 to get around by bicycle. Completing safe, low-stress, connected bicycle networks region-wide would be a smart and inexpensive investment for transportation funding, especially as we see more people on e-bikes. SABA would love to work with more jurisdictions figuring out safe routes to school, to work, to restaurants, to parks, to libraries, just to mention some of the destinations where active transportation projects are needed that empower more people to choose riding bicycles for short trips around town. Many of our daily trips are less than 2 miles away, and it would be easy to go by bicycle if people felt it was safe to do so. I'm also a senior citizen, often do errands on my bicycle. Let's make sure our region continues to be eligible to get federal and state funding. And please do your part by approving a regional plan that meets the greenhouse gas reduction targets.
Thank you, Sue. Rob Burness is next.
I am Rob Burness, and I am speaking on behalf of Habitat 2020, a coalition of conservation organizations in the Sacramento region, and also for the Motherlode chapter of the Sierra Club, which includes all of your member counties. As the world continues to fall behind in responding to the imperatives of the Earth's climate crisis, it is even more important that major urban centers step up to do their part to meet the challenge. For us, in this moment, that means meeting our greenhouse gas reduction targets as established by the ARB. The consequences of not doing so are not only collectively grave for our future, but they have real practical impact and immediate consequences with respect to sustaining much needed funding to meet the region's transportation challenges. Those funds are substantial, and if used with care, will help us reach our greenhouse gas reduction targets. As you progress through the development and approval of the MTP, we urge you to focus on the necessary steps to adopt a plan that meets the greenhouse gas reduction targets for the region and fully embrace the commitment to an ambitious blueprint which best facilitates that goal. However, I would be remiss if, on behalf of the organizations that I represent, who are very much involved in protecting natural habitats, forested lands, and agricultural resources within our region, if I did not also urge your board to address our collective responsibility to protect and enhance the carbon sequestration that those lands provide. We would suggest that it is due time for SACOG to scope and initiate the development of a complement to the blueprint, a green print, if you will, a plan for the region that recognizes and responds to the need to not only reduce emissions, but to positively manage sequestration. We and our conservation partners would very much like to engage with you and your staff to begin that effort. We ask for your support. Thank you for your consideration of our requests.
Thank you for your comments. Lori Heller is next.
Good morning. My name is Lori Heller, and I'm a volunteer with 350 Sacramento. I'm also retired from the State Natural Resources Agency, and since 2017, I've been an active advocate for Sacramento County's Climate Action Plan. The American River Parkway demonstrates what the forethought and statesmanship of a generation of regional leaders can accomplish. Some consider it the jewel of Sacramento. I certainly do. And I know personally that it's envied by counties all over the state. Likewise, the Blueprint 1.0 represented a generation of civic leaders who recognized, after a bit of prodding, that shaping the growth of our region in a sustainable fashion would benefit people who lived here. And it proved a model for California, inspiring legislation such as SB 375 that is seeking to bring sustainability to the whole state. I hope such vision and leadership exists today on the SACOG board when it comes to adopting a plan that actually really meets our greenhouse gas reduction targets. Because it will be a heavy lift, insisting on more transit-oriented infill, revitalizing our suburbs so that they are complete communities, and leaving the green fields green. The consequences of not meeting GHG targets means more than losing access to grant funds, although as a prior grants administrator, that would be disgraceful. The consequences are already evident and grow more expensive, disaster by disaster. A generation from now, wouldn't it be great if your descendants could say, my grandparent made this possible, a more sustainable region, rather than having to answer their question, why the hell didn't you do something when there was still time? Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Susan Hare is next.
Good morning, board directors. I'm Susan Haree. I'm the president of ECOS, Environmental Council of Sacramento. I'm a licensed architect and certified planner. Thank you for the opportunity to address you today regarding the 2025 blueprint. We would like, as my colleagues have said, to urge the board to direct staff to develop a land use and transportation scenario that meets the CARB required 19% reduction in per capita greenhouse gas emissions for the SACOG region. As they've said, this is important for the environment. The reality of climate change is obvious, and we must do our part. But it's also important for the economy. The risk of not developing a scenario that meets is the loss of many millions in state funding, and this will hurt every jurisdiction over the life of the plan. ECOS is prepared to help by focusing on infill development around transit, the land use transportation nexus. We're starting a case study in South Sacramento that's based in the Cal EnviroScreen maps by the California State Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. Those maps show the most environmentally impacted areas. So the case study would test infill development forms and densities. It would start with the build-out capacity that's in the existing approved general plans for the city and the county. Because it is in South Sacramento, it would be just involved Sacramento City and County. And the case study will test open space and streetscape changes as well, and market feasibility. Uh-oh. So we would like to see how this case study could show the revitalization of existing urbanized areas, how that could help meet the 19% reduction goal. But apart from this, ECOS and our partners would like to support your efforts to develop the 2025 blueprint. We'd like to engage with you in the development process. As a side note, of course, we support your Green Means Go initiative and any efforts to fund that. So thank you very much for considering our comments.
Thank you for your comments. Next is Jeff Short.
Jeff Short, North State BIA. Let me be the last to wish you good morning. I just want to remind the board of a few things. First, that per state law, individual projects do still have to mitigate for VMT on their own as part of their land use process with your individual cities or counties. And also that new homes are in and of themselves the most efficient homes on the market. We're still in a housing crisis. And so I'd encourage the board to encourage and not limit housing of all types. And we look forward as an association to helping to encourage that needed infill development that is still the most expensive and difficult to develop growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm going to go ahead and close public comment, bring this back to the board.
Thank you, Chair. A couple things. One is just from a procedural standpoint, in the future, we should probably schedule, this is the most important thing we deal with or are dealing with, this by itself, so we can really have a robust discussion, because I know there's, myself included, people pushing up against time to go to another committee meeting that has impacts on SACOG in about 30 seconds. But I'll make a few comments on what I heard and ask a couple of questions. First of all, I really like the thinking outside the box and really coming up with and creatively looking at strategies for reducing greenhouse gas. But at the same time, you know, we have to be cognizant of, if we really do have a triple bottom line, what some of the unintended consequences are. One of our E's is economy, and I think that we've seen over the last few years what telecommuting has done to our local urban core. And that needs to be taken into consideration. And as far as equity goes, I'm just using telecommuting as one example, by the way. As far as telecommuting goes, from an equity standpoint, those in lower socioeconomic strata have a lot less opportunities to telecommute than others. So there's an equity question to be addressed with that as well. One of the concerns that I have with some of the work that we're doing, and again, this is why we need more information. We need a more robust discussion at the board level than we've been allotted to today, is the how the projects that are currently in the works, how they're being analyzed. I have absolutely no doubt and really have tremendous faith in the ability of this staff to analyze data. My question always is, and I've spoken to our staff about this, is the data that's being analyzed, not the ability to analyze the data. And as an example, I'll just use a project that has recently been approved by the Sacramento County Board of Supervisors, significant project down on the Jackson Highway corridor that is net zero GHG at build out, if you look at all of the amenities that are included in that project. However, if you take a sliver of that project and you don't look at the project in its totality, then it doesn't meet the greenhouse gas goals. So I just want to make sure that the data that we are analyzing is actually accurate. Another concern I have is, and I've asked for years since I've been on this board, we keep hearing about, if we don't do this, we're going to lose federal funding. If we don't do that, if we do an ATP, we won't qualify for federal funding. But I've asked for, direct citations and authority. And if we could get that and see what those impacts really are, because right now we're always getting information on that subject at the 30,000 foot level. And we need to get further into the weeds in order for us to make the decisions that we're going to have to make in the future on this subject. And finally, I do, for the sake of time, I have a lot of notes, but I'm going to go right to the another point, and that's to ask staff. Sacramento County wrote a letter back in October. Our planning staff sent a letter. Has there been that was 4 months ago, has there been a response to that?
We have been working with Sacramento County staff, and we will continue to do so leading up to this April meeting and even going beyond that. And so with the pathways engagement that was happening last year, we're working with local staff, and we were giving out, the set of land use assumptions, a very preliminary set of land use assumptions. They were commenting back, and we were having that kind of iterative process. We have not had a follow-up since, I think, the end of last year, but we do have one in the works.
I understand you're meeting soon, but 4 months seems, it was a 4-page letter, I think. It would have been nice for a member of the Board of Supervisors to understand what our own staff is concerned about, or the points that they brought up and the questions they've asked, for us to really have, and I can't speak for my colleague here, but for me to really have an understanding of where the differences lie and what the positions are of SACOG staff. And I guess finally, one of the things that I want to just be cautioning of is, I think it was Oscar that said that, how important infill is. And I think everybody around this table understands how valuable and important infill is. And we know that if we don't focus to a degree on infill, we're not going to get to our goals, and not just GHG goals, but other goals as well, lifestyle and other goals. That being said, I want to just be cautionary that we don't do what I kind of use the term utopian planning, so that we plan something that's never going to get built anyway. And I've been guilty of that. Back in the mid-90s, when I was on the City Planning Commission, in North Natomas, we had plans that called for, European villages with small winding roads and little cafes on every corner, which was not marketable, could never be built. And what came in afterwards, after variance after variance after variance, was far less than what we probably could have gotten if we were more realistic. And by realistic in infill, I specifically mean we can't talk about infill without doing a deep dive into the infrastructure costs. The cost of infill is, astronomically higher than greenfill and field development. Not to say it's not important, we don't need to do it, but we have to be realistic and look at what those costs are. Green means go. I love it. I've walked the halls of the Capitol supporting it, trying to get more money for it, but it's not going to come anywhere near what we need if we're really going to be serious about greenfill. So while we can't be guilty of that utopian planning, we really have to look at what is good for our goals and our strategies, but also can be accomplished in a realistic manner.
Yes, and to clarify a previous comment that I made, prior or following the issuance of that letter, the 4-page letter you alluded to, we did meet with Sacramento County staff. And then also I would like to note that Cascadia Partners, they're doing a housing demand analysis, and as part of that contract, they're also convening a focus group of sorts with building industry individuals in the region to really take a deeper dive into some of those issues, those infill issues, and some of the barriers that there are to, really accelerating infill development.
I hope that, I'm sorry, one more thing since you brought it up. I hope that is the case, because we're all getting conflicting numbers from what is expected. It was said here today, I can't find it in my notes, but that the assumptions that are made and if I read general plan, we'd be highly oversubscribed. That's, one position that SACOG staff's taken, but we're hearing from industry folks and others that, that the numbers that we're assuming at SACOG are far lower than what they're assuming will be built. So we've got to come to terms with those. And so I'm glad to hear that process is underway. Thank you.
Great. So Vice Chair Soon, then Director Desmond, then Director Lozano.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. A couple quick questions. When I look at the GHG reduction strategies, it's counterintuitive to me that EV and bike scooter share are similar in their effect, just given the mass adoption of EVs and the limited use of bike scooter shares. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so the percentage you're seeing there is more so that would be a very focused effort at the local level to provide, EV charging infrastructure and the benefits that you get there. That's why it's much smaller. So the actual GHG reduction benefits that you get from seeing the fleet turnover from, combustion engine to electric vehicle engine, that's all accounted for on the state level. And so we as a region are essentially not able to take credit for that because that's all really baked in to the target. So they take that kind of off the top before they assign the target, and then following that, we're assigned our target that only that's already been taken into account.
Okay, so that 19% requirement it accounts for EV.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. So the state essentially has their policy at the state level that they account for on their side of things before they give us our targets.
I see. Okay, and then the other question I have is there an equation to vehicle miles traveled to GHG reduction? In other words, for instance, my wife drives 36 miles to work. How much GHG is that?
VMT is a proxy for greenhouse gas emissions, but obviously the makeup of the fleet is a big component of that. So there is a way to calculate that. It's a fairly complex calculation though, and so there's no real simple calculation to go from A to B, from the VMT to the GHG. But so VMT it can be viewed as a proxy for greenhouse gas emissions, but it's not necessarily a direct one-to-one ratio.
Okay, yeah, because my follow-up was, well, she now drives an electrical vehicle, so it just goes to zero, correct?
In terms of greenhouse gas emissions,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, well,
Not zero, but yeah,
I see.
much lower.
Okay, we'll talk about it in another time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Director Desmond.
In the interest of time, I'll just say, comment, my colleague, Director Kennedy's sentiments ditto. But in terms of responding to the County of Sacramento's letter, what I'd ask for is a meeting with SACOG staff and the county staff who authored the letter. And I'd like to be a part of that follow-up meeting to really dig into some of those issues we have with the assumptions. That there's no one in Sacramento County that wants to attract infill development more than I do in my district with all these urbanized unincorporated communities. But we have some real profound challenges that I don't know if we can get over them and get even close to some of the assumptions that you're making. So I'd like to be part of that meeting when you set that up with staff.
Okay.
Thank you.
Noted. Thank you.
Director Lozano.
Yeah, I'll be really brief. I attended the strategic planning committee last week. And there was another gentleman that came and talked about the last year there was planned 11,000 units of housing to be built, and what was built was about 6,000. I know housing is just one piece of the blueprint, but I think what we need to do, we had a discussion about what we could take credit for, what the state already takes credit for, but I would just ask that staff keep in the front of their minds about working with these people that are building our housing to address some of the strategies we can do to recover some of that credit as we move forward. Again, I had some other notes, but I'll bypass on them. But I think that's going to be an important piece when we're talking about what housing is needed and where it's going to be needed, to see if we can't recover some of that credit that the state, in my opinion, has taken from us locally. So, thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry, I think I alluded to some of these questions earlier, but one of them was How's this plan, how is this planning to balance the needs of new and affordable housing against reducing GHG? That, with most of the houses that are affordable are being built on the outer edge of the region. How's the blueprint gonna help add infrastructure to future employment areas that are close to the areas where people are living? What are the strategies staff is using to ensure that people throughout the 6-county region will have equal access to economic opportunities and not just those closest to the center of the city of Sacramento? And lastly, South Sutter County is in crosshairs right now that I'm aware of large projects spread across the region that have smaller impact on GHG and VMT than typical developed communities today. Your analysis seems to kind of push these emerging areas it's punishing these emerging areas by the way, analyzing them at less than build out conditions. And I guess why are you treating these areas this way?
Yeah, so to your first question on the affordability, the housing affordability question, that's something that we're studying. I had mentioned, and my colleague Dov had mentioned earlier about this study that we're conducting with Cascadia Partners. We're looking at housing trends in the region as well as nationwide, with, peer kind of cities and regions in the United States to see how Sacramento is stacking up against them in terms of providing some of the more dense, housing unit types, more attached housing units, smaller housing units, stuff that is more affordable. So you'll get a presentation on that in March. So you'll get a lot more information on that. And for your second, can you repeat your second question? You went.
How's the blueprint going to help add infrastructure to future employment areas that are close to where people are living?
We go through for example, for transportation infrastructure, the selection of transportation infrastructure programs or projects, we look at where those projects are needed most. You'll be hearing a lot more about that in April, and we'll be engaging with the transportation project sponsors leading up to that and following that to give a more detailed and robust kind of rundown of how we're deciding on the projects to include. But that is a big factor, providing those connections between housing and job areas and job centers in order to provide efficient transportation between those two land use types. And so I think there is a lot more information on this to come. I mean, that's a huge topic and something that the blueprint is inherently trying to address. And so you'll be hearing a lot more about this in future meetings and presentations.
Director Baines and Chair Saragosa, briefly, good comments and good questions, right? So we'll take them all in and we'll feed these back. One of the things I would say is remember the target year for your greenhouse gas reduction stays the same and every plan cycle gets closer to it. So we have less and less wiggle room as we go. It's kind of like you run through your deck of cards and you're trying to make the royal flush and it just gets harder to do. By 2035, all of the new growth greenfield areas, we're not going to develop all of those, right? So we as staff and as an agency have to make some tough choices about what comes into the plan and what is not in the plan. Because we're not going to build all of that by 2035. So there's regulatory, there's market, and there's policy. And for the first time today, we've shown you from a policy perspective, how do these greenfields perform in terms of vehicle miles traveled? The closer to job centers, the lower they are. I would definitely commend that to you. And I think we are also trying to figure out how to get you all to weigh in on some policy factors. We do not want to see partial build out of any of these areas because it's not good. But the challenge is an oversupply by 2035, and that's not all going to come into the plan. It just can't. So we'll be as transparent as we can. I hope you appreciate this morning. We tried to do that. And Director Kennedy, we hear you. That was the most specific on the funding risk we have. That is both in state statute and in guideline. We'll get you all the citations for that. I want to be first in many things. I don't want to be the first region that loses out on the $500 million that we've been able to actually compete for the last 5 years under risk.
Sir,
Yes.
just a quick question. Cascadia Cascadia Partners?
Correct.
Is that affiliated with Bill Gates' Cascade Investment, the largest landowner in America?
I do not know the answer to
Okay,
that
I need to
question.
know.
Director Gallardo?
No, they are not.
Thank you. I just want to follow up, and I really appreciated, of course, it's my world, but your comments about school buses. I still feel like this is low-hanging fruit, and I'm just looking at Sacramento County and thinking Elk Grove, Sac City, Natomas, Twin Rivers, San Juan, that's over 200,000 kids. In 2010, the national average for kids that rode the school bus was 59%, and California was 15, and it's dropped dramatically since then. Most every one of those districts only do mandated special ed transportation now. And we have to remind ourselves, those are real trips. Every one of us hates this traffic around our schools twice a day. It's a nightmare for every jurisdiction here, I guarantee it. And you think about it, NHTSA, National Highway Traffic Safety, has said there is no safer method of transportation in the US than a California school bus. We have the highest standards. So you think about, we can tell parents, this is the safest. They have not been funded, and that's why in the mid-80s it started dropping, because the state didn't fund school buses. That is low-hanging fruit. I think it's something that we can go after, get kids on board, and truly with, they also are all running clean vehicles. You'll see every one of those districts is going electric now. They all have CNG, particulate traps. So I think it's low-hanging fruit we have to include, and you can get real numbers. Make parents' lives easier, they'll do it.
I agree. Director Villegas.
Just real briefly, thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the things that we talked about in the Lunar Committee earlier, a couple of weeks ago, was really making it very clear to this body, the timeline, because there are some sort of drop dead dates that are going to come fast and furious. And I know part of the frustration, many of us wear many hats, is when things come to us very quickly, there's a lot of suspicion around why is this happening now? And I should have been told before. And so staff, thank you very much. I saw the timeline. There are some things that, at least at the moment, unless this board changes it, June and October are going to have something of a drop dead deadline for us to make some significant decisions. I just wondered, in the spirit of sort of transparency and making sure that folks have information that they need to make some difficult decisions, we may consider either starting earlier or maybe going a little bit later, because I'm worried as you look around the room, folks are making commitments that are squeezing us. And that level of anxiety is only going to grow as the decisions that we're making relative to this blueprint discussion are going to get more and more difficult. So, thanks.
Great comments, Director, and I think we're gonna have to be much better at fine tuning the timeline on these as well as these meetings themselves. So well said.
And I will note to that we will be distributing at the committee meetings in March, that annotated schedule that I had mentioned, which will have a lot more detail in it. And hopefully we'll be able to get some, robust feedback from all the committee members during those committee meetings on some of those dates and some of those action items that we'll be bringing to the board.
Great. All right. So in the interest of time, I'm gonna, I think, close comments there. We're obviously gonna skip item 13, so we'll go to item 14, which are chair reports or board member reports. Anyone have anything for the good of the order? Yes, Director Huff. Or yes.
Thank you, Chair Sargos. I just wanted to introduce myself to the board. I am the newly minted acting District 3 Director for Caltrans. Look forward to working with everyone. So just wanted to take this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Director Aceves. Welcome. James, anything?
The only thing I'd say is, given this conversation, even probably how you cut it short, one thing that we could do is provide a lunchtime session between the March committees. So between transportation and land use, we could come back and allow a little bit more digging into this blueprint topic, if that is of interest. So we'll survey you all, but that is, we hear you, and we could offer that up. That's it.
All right, thank you. There is a receive and file item, so I'll let people read those at their own leisure, and we will adjourn today's meeting. So thank you, everybody.